Good morning and welcome to the fourth meeting of the Education, Children and Young People Committee in 2026. The first item on our agenda this morning is an evidence session with trade union representatives from 4 of our universities. And can I welcome Dan Cutts, Joint Chair, Aberdeen University UCU Branch, Melissa DeCencio, Joint President, Dundee University UCU Branch, Sophia Woodman, President, Edinburgh University UCU Branch, and Stuart Forrester, Unite Senior Representative at Strathclyde University. Can I welcome you all today and thank you for the written evidence that has been submitted and circulated to the committee. You're quite a large panel, we are a large committee, so there may be questions that you feel have already been answered or you feel you don't have anything to contribute, so don't feel obliged to answer every question, but if you have something to say, please do get involved, indicate you want to come in, or there may be specific questions put to specific witnesses. And can I also thank you for correspondence, not just in the run-up to this, but indeed your engagement with this committee over many months and years. And the committee were very keen to hear from you and the representations you're making on behalf of your members, because we have had principals and senior management from a number of the universities, but we were extremely keen to hear your views and your opinions on what is going on in your individual respective universities and the university sector more generally. So can I perhaps kick off the questioning to you all, and I'll go to you first, Mr Cutts, and work my way across. What is the current feeling at your individual university with the financial plight, the jobs that are under threat, morale of staff and students? Just give us a picture of where you think things are just now.
Yeah, happy to. So, I mean, over the past couple of years, really since 2013, there's been a significant change in how things have been operating. So we had the situation with modern languages, which many of you will be aware of. And ever since then, it's been voluntary severance has been part of it, enhanced retirement, dwindling staff numbers. So from October 23 to October 25, we've seen a reduction of 23% in overall staff. And that obviously has significant workload implications for everyone involved. There's significant concerns around how we can continue to deliver the good service for students, and get them the best experience. And so it's very challenging. We're working harder than ever. Obviously, we had a 1.4% pay rise, which was deferred for some time at Aberdeen, but eventually got through. But obviously, we're working harder. The remuneration isn't quite there as people would like it to be. So, yeah, it's extremely challenging, and it just seems to be continuous. We don't see where this is going to end. And I think that will do for an introduction.
Thank you.
Thank you, and thanks to the committee for inviting us here today. I think the situation at Dundee is extremely difficult. This has been evidenced in a couple of listening exercises and well-being surveys that the university has conducted and the union has conducted recently, both with all staff and in the case of Dundee UCU with our own members. These listening exercises and well-being survey paint a picture which is dramatic. About 60 to 70% of respondents to the listening exercise to the university report psychological or physical impact from the crisis, including anxiety, difficulty to sleep, physical symptoms, including palpitation and exacerbation of pre-existing conditions. And in our own survey, what we see is that at least 65% of the respondents to our survey report increased in workload to the level of course, impacting on personal life. It feels like staff lives are on hold. From these surveys, what transpires is that staff feels completely abandoned from a career perspective, but at the same time feels like they are unable to make life decisions such as creating a family, or they're worried about their mortgages. And as the colleague in Aberdeen was saying, it feels like there is no end to this. The crisis at Dundee has been going on since November 2024, and staff are literally on their knees. In the meantime, we've seen a lot of our colleagues leave, not just through the voluntary severance pension scheme, but through retirement, through changes of careers and changes of jobs. So colleagues have moved on, and colleagues have had to pick up that workload. And of course, we are, just as our colleagues in Aberdeen, very worried about the kind of student experience that we can offer, and whether we will be able to continue providing the suite of courses and programs that we currently offer. So yeah, this is unfortunately the situation we're in. Just to let the committee know that this situation is exacerbated by the fact that the University of Dundee in 2024 decided to change the way in which it measures workload, and we currently have a logged failure to agree since September 2024 with the university. And at the time, we said to the university that the reason why we were logging a failure to agree was because we felt that the new workload allocation model was failing to indicate how roles would be accounted for in terms of time and effort, and therefore it would not produce the sufficient safeguards against exploitation and breaches of the working time regulation. So this, unfortunately, is the situation we find ourselves in.
Thank you.
Well, also like to really thank the committee for taking up these issues seriously. I'd like to point out that I'm not just representing my own union, but the joint unions at the University of Edinburgh that has written to the committee on a number of occasions expressing a lot of serious concerns. Edinburgh is a winner from the marketised higher education system, and in a sense the last institution that should be doing this kind of thing. But we see very similar kinds of issues as those outlined by the other union reps already, with a real fear of people losing their jobs. Over the last year, there's almost 800 staff already gone, and more job cuts to come. The joint unions believe these cuts are unnecessary and unfair, and that the financial crisis at Edinburgh is really due to serious mismanagement, especially excessive capital spending. We see really similar patterns of ballooning workloads. The joint unions did a all-staff survey, so it was not just union members, it was open to all staff in 2024. So before the cuts really started to bite, and we found that about 75% of staff were already overworking at that point. So the problem has gotten really worse. People working beyond their contracted hours, work speed up for professional services, gaps in professional service teams that people are having to take on additional work that for colleagues who've left. And this is obviously having a serious impact on what we do for our students and for our research. We've seen student experience funds evaporate due to the cuts. Funding for tutors, that is our most casualised staff, has shrunk, meaning there are larger tutorial classes and less attention in those classes. Course and programme offerings are being eliminated, and research funding has been cut to the bone. And we think that is going to impact the quality of research and teaching long into the future. So staff are adamantly opposed to these cuts, and so the unions in this context are not just representing their members, but really all staff. And it's a crisis point in universities, and it needn't be this way, in our view.
Good morning, committee. At my university this time last year, we went to dispute over our pension. They took our Strathclyde pension off us, and the university got £85 million off us by taking our pension. They were that desperate to get our pension that they gave us £6,000 each. Well, they started off at £500, but ended up giving us £6,000 each, 4 days holiday, and actually paid us for having 2 weeks in strike. They paid us that. So that's how desperate they wanted for the university needed our money to make them secure. They also gave us guarantees that that money would make the university secure and going forward. 6 months down the line, we're now back in dispute because the university is now just tapping people on the shoulder saying, time to leave. We need the money back in. My university has to save £35 million over 2 years. So it's £20 million this year, £15 million next year. They've now got £12.5 million just now, and they're now looking for another £8 million by the end of this year. So people are now going through a second phase of being told out of 68 people, they're now looking for another 24 people to go to save money again. It is now brought on by the 3 unions at university that the workload is unacceptable. They're actually picking on people that, through management, we found out through the way things are working, that it's mostly people who's been in long-term sickness or got a disabled, that people, that the management are actually picking on them. And the unions are now looking into that to see if we can improve this against the university, because the management has the right to pick who they want. We don't get it through the voluntary services, so it's totally unacceptable. My university has got £210 million in the bank, and they're still looking for money. But I need to ask this committee a question, and if you don't mind me asking. My university had to pay £29 million for Scottish students this year, because the Scottish Government gave us £117 million tax-free, but we had to find another £29 million to educate them. And I want to know why my university and other universities have to pay this money to get Scottish students where I'm losing jobs through this. Whereas if you'd gave us the money that we deserved, with £29 million, we wouldn't be in this situation. I'm on the jinxes, and I understand that I represent 69 universities in Britain for paid terms and conditions. And I believe, and honestly, the universities are going through a crisis just now because of lack of funds from government and from what's happening in education. And at my university, it's went from, since Jim McDonald left, it's a tap on the shoulder now, or people's not getting told what they should be getting told. And then the university's only given them 30 days to come up with why I should keep your job here. Right? I had people over Christmas who work in the States, and they were told their jobs were going, 4 of them, plant managers, and they said one left, one said, OK, I'll go for another job and I'll take the VR system, the voluntary service. And over Christmas, come back and find out, oh, we actually need you. So we put them through stress over Christmas for 4 weeks, saying that your job's going, then they come back to university and now says, we need you. It's totally, absolutely shambles at my university right now. Universities now listen to us because all 3 unions have put a grievance in against the university, the way they set it up, what they were doing, how they went about their business. But at this day, just now, I think that the universities should actually get brought to task, and actually, it's turned into a business rather than being a university now. That's what my feelings. OK, thanks, Chair.
Well, thank you all very much. I think that's, I say a good overview because it's helpful, but it's not good, the picture you're painting on the ground. And really the last couple of points that we heard, Ms Woodman, you were saying, the financial pressures are down to serious mismanagement. Mr Forrester, you were suggesting government funding is not sufficient. Where does the blame lie here? Is it the level of funding that universities are getting? Is it the management on the ground? And we're seeing this is not just 1 or 2 universities. We've got the 4 universities represented here, but you also represent universities across the country where we're seeing financial pressures articulated. I'll come to you, Mr Forrester, but my question really is, who's to blame, or is it a combination of a number of things, and why is it reaching such a pinnacle now in terms of the problems and the number of job losses that are being either we've seen through voluntary redundancy or are being anticipated going forward? Mr Forrester.
It's a combination of both. The university relied on foreign students. That's now been taken away from most universities. Universities then started building shiny new buildings for the students' experience, which cost them a fortune. And then it's a bit of bad management as well. So, and very much so a lack of funding from governments, both governments, Scottish Government and the national government. That's what it's a fault of both. Yeah, and you can get bad management as well if you put money in the wrong place, or you can get as I say, the lack of foreign students now has caused a massive problem with lots of universities. They relied on them. Thanks.
Ms D'Asensio.
Thank you. Well, I do recognise that, of course, funding for universities has gone down in real terms over the past 10 years. It is important also to note that, for example, in the case of my institution, the University of Dundee, the crisis developed just after 2 or 3 years that were the most successful in terms of student recruitment. The University of Dundee was bringing in about £70 million in student fees in 2020, 2021, and then for the following 3 years they brought in between 95 and £115 million in fees per year. So they were extremely successful, and then on top of that the university sold shares for £40 million. So this is a university that should have been able to absorb any shock from the market, but it wasn't, and the reason why it wasn't able to absorb the shock from the market was because of financial mismanagement, and this is very clearly highlighted in the Gillies report. Particularly, the Gillies report notes that capital expenditure at the university had continued at unsustainable levels throughout the period, while the university knew that it had an operational deficit, and that 43 million spent in capital expenditure between the the financial year 23 and 24 was backed by cash reserves. So effectively what the leadership of our university was doing, it was financing shiny new building or capital expenditure refurbishment with cash. Now, you could give these people in leadership a lot more money, but where is it going to be spent? Is it going to go towards the student experience and towards staff, or is it going to go into new shiny buildings, and new offices? And also, if you look at the experience from Dundee, there was very poor management in terms of big transformation projects. The Gillies report again shows how the universities had invested about £20 million in intangible assets, and since 2016, and about £8 million of those investments had been written off as systems and never went live. So I think, in a way, our principals and vice-chancellors are trying to have their cake and eat it. They would like more money from the Scottish Government or from the national government, but at the same time, no oversight. And we, on our side, as unions, we would say, yes, of course, possibly the sector does need more money to be sustainable, but also that money needs to have very clear oversight and scrutiny on where it's going to be spent.
Mr Capps.
Yes, thank you. Yeah, so just to build on what my colleague from Dundee said there, the situation at Aberdeen, I feel like the way the funding model has operated has led the institution to take more risk, right? And that over-reliance on international students puts a lot of things out of the control of the institution. So when there is a dip in that, you're exposed to the shock. I mean, obviously, yeah, we would love to see more money for the sector, but I completely agree that I don't necessarily agree that money should be used for things like new buildings. But that being said, like the situation in Aberdeen, and my other trade union colleagues at Unison and Unite would like me to raise, is that we're over £100 million behind on repairs for buildings. So we now have operations in Mumbai, which I'm going to be neutral about, because I'm not going to say much more on that. But also we have a new science teaching hub. But what's actually happening to the institution at home is a key issue. I mean, if the buildings are not being maintained correctly, that's what we need to be looking at, because that impacts the student experience and staff working conditions as well. Thank you.
Yes, so Edinburgh has never been in deficit. It continues to make a large surplus, and it depends how you calculate that. But if we measure it by EBITDA, I guess the committee is already familiar with this term, but it's earnings before interest, tax, depreciation and amortization. Last year, they made a £96 million surplus. Management's now using other calculations that make the surplus much smaller. Student numbers and tuition fees remain at an all-time high. Research income, likewise, with research grants have been rising. The university has an enormous endowment and investment fund with net assets of 3.1 billion, and lots of that is potentially usable cash rather than tied up. So the problem at Edinburgh is really poor governance. We see very similar problems as identified in the Gillies report. University autonomy should really not mean free rein for an unaccountable group of managers. The Senate voted no confidence in the financial proposals, and the Senate is the body that is supposed to oversee the teaching and research, the academic mission of the university as a governance body, but they voted no confidence in management's financial proposals because of their impact on the core mission of the university in May last year, and we've heard no response from management, no response from the university court. So the problem is really a lack of proper oversight by the university court. The university court does not look into the finance data it's given by management or the kind of analysis of those finances by management, and doesn't, look through the homework of the senior leadership. So this is an acute problem, and one that I think government could address. Funding is an issue everywhere. We know that, and obviously higher education needs to be more of a priority. I'm sure you've all been hearing from constituents, including students, who tell you that. But unaccountable management, if it were more transparent, if there were more staff and students on governing bodies, that would make an important difference. And let me just conclude by giving you one figure. Last year, when the cuts were already underway, Edinburgh spent £200 million on capital expenditure. In what world is that an acceptable way acceptable priority for a university that is a charity with a core mission of research and teaching?
I realise my questions have been quite open, which is why we've had good answers, but comprehensive answers. We will have to try and tighten things a bit to get round all committee members. Final question from me at the moment. What is the level of trust between unions and university management? And what do you believe is the level of meaningful engagement? Because when we have principals and vice-chancellors and other senior managers in front of the committee, and some have written to us this week to say, we regularly engage, we do this, we listen to unions. Does it feel like you're being listened to, or are we being fobbed off with answers like that? Mr. Cutts.
Well, yeah, thank you very much for asking the question. This has been a significant problem for us in Aberdeen. And I suppose that when the Fair Work principles were introduced, this was something that the union really valued, and we were really excited that things would get better with Fair Work principles, especially around effective voice. So we really welcome this. But since we signed that document, we have had very, very little engagement with the senior management team. So we felt that we had to sign it. Obviously, it's associated with access to funding, so we didn't want to be in a position to stop that happening. So we signed that document, and since then there's been a number of issues, and that's for all three unions, so UCU, Unite, Unison. We've all had issues in engaging with the management. And I suppose it relates directly to the Adapting for Continued Success programme of change that is happening at the institution. So plans for this change will go to court on February the 18th. We have not had any engagement on this, and this is talking about completely reshaping the institution. And I would say it's not just the unions that haven't had engagement on it, and the University Senate hasn't either. So we've not been made aware of what the plans are, what the reasoning for the changes might be, how much savings could be made by the changes that they're suggesting. They're also refusing to rule out compulsory redundancies, so that makes us very suspicious. But why can't you do that? Other institutions in Scotland have done that. It would relieve a lot of stress for staff if that was not going to be part of the change programme. But at the moment, the senior management team are refusing to do that. The other issue that we have is that there's a number of interim positions at the University of Aberdeen. So we have an interim principal, interim university secretary, and we also have a lot of new people in the institution as a number of people left. So we don't know them and how they operate at the way that we would like to. And in combination of not being able to sit with them and discuss things, we don't get to know them. We don't know what they're thinking. We don't know what their plans are. And just like one last point to keep it brief, we lodged that we were going into dispute with the university in December, and we've had no dispute resolution meetings. So we're completely being denied that, which is not how things worked previously.
Did you want to come in, Mr Forrester? No.
Yeah.
I'm seeing a lot of nods, so maybe if there's... Ms Woodwin.
I would say that regular engagement doesn't mean meaningful consultation. So that is the key point. You may know we, UCU Edinburgh, did reach an agreement with management in December for a sort of pause to our industrial action in return for a pause to compulsory redundancies. And we're waiting to see whether meaningful engagement can mean what it says and what we think. But the problem, I think, is that what management considers meaningful engagement may not meet with what we think those standards are. I mean, we have had some financial disclosure, but not enough. There's been an unwillingness to negotiate on a penny of the cuts to proposed to staff, not one penny. Even if the financial circumstances change. And we've been requesting, they're using a lot of data from management consultants to shape some of the plans for change. We have this unaccountable structure, the University Initiatives Portfolio Board, that has they've hired a whole lot of change management specialists. We don't know who they are. Do they know anything about universities? And we've been asking for a year for the data generated by those management consultants that is informing management's decisions, and we haven't received access to any of it.
Okay, I think we will touch on these points as
Big no to your question.
Okay,
I thought you were going that way. I apologise.
But I've also taken up half an hour of our session with just my questions.
Can I see what's happening at Strathclyde University now, please?
Can I maybe ask if we do it, because there are other questions on this, and I will take in Paul McLennan in a second, and if we get further through the session and you've not been able to get your points across, I'll take you back in. I just want to make sure members from all parties get the opportunity. But Paul McLennan.
And just on that point, and I think you started to touch on it for me. You started to touch on it for me, and I think that there's an element here in terms of, is this cultural? And I think you've touched on it as well, Stuart, in terms of within the university management, or is it structural? So what needs to change? Because we're hearing from all four universities here that there's issues with senior management and mismanagement. But does it need a change of culture, or does it need a structural change to change that? Because Sophia, you touched on around about getting an influence or finding out about things. So I'm trying to understand about where you feel the problem lies. Is it culture, or does it need to change structurally? And I think that's one of the key things when it comes back to Dundee, for example. That's a case of its own, but I'm interested in where you think the specifics that the university management need to change.
It has changed at my university, because since up to October we had a really good relationship with HR, all three unions. And then once they started doing people tapping the shoulders, not letting us know what's happening, the culture suddenly changed. It took all three unions to put a grievance in against the university to turn and say this is unacceptable what you're doing to us. The university has now come back and starting to talk to us, but the whole culture is that it's all money driven. Right? It's all about saving the money and their reputation at the university for being, as you know, the Strathclyde University has won many awards over the years. And it was since Jim left, the whole culture's totally changed. The universities, my university specifically, had a really good relationship with the unions, but it's kind of went toxic because they needed to save the money. And they never gave us information. They gave people 30 days notice to try and come up with to save their jobs. Wouldn't give them a time scale. Offered people, they would have a TikTok talk, and then after it, they'd turn and say that you two people are going. And they're like, what, I thought we just had a conversation here. No, you two have been picked to go. You either take the voluntary system or you go compulsory redundancy. Right? And also in compulsory redundancy, we've asked for that taken away. So both unions, Unite and UCU, are running a ballot right now to take compulsory action against my university on this. And the new principal has not recognised our dispute. He's not even come back to us, not once, to say, I recognise what's going on. So the whole culture of my university has changed. We used to have a really good rapport with my university. It's went toxic now. And that's wrong for a university, because we all have to talk, we all have to get on, but we need to do something to kind of resolve this. Thanks, Chair.
Okay, thank you. I would just like to move this on a little bit, if that's okay. We've received apologies this morning from Ross Greer, and his party colleague Maggie Chapman is attending as a committee substitute, and we move now to Maggie's questions. Ms Chapman.
Thanks very much, Convener. And before I start, can I just remind colleagues of my register of interests? I'm Rector of the University of Dundee. And can I also send my solidarity to UCU members on strike at Dundee University today? I want to, my first chunk of questions is around the student experience and the impact of all of this uncertainty, all of this culture change on them, because quite often students bear the consequences of cuts and mismanagement, but are excluded from decision making. So can each of you just give us a flavour of the direct impacts on students of course closures, staff losses, rising staff workloads, and are these impacts on students being accounted for or measured in any way? Dan, I'll start with you.
Yeah, thank you. Yeah, so, I mean, before coming here, I spoke with the ALSA colleagues, because I think it's really important that we listen to what the students are experiencing on the ground. We see it in the classroom, but sometimes it's good to get the direct view from the ALSA president. So, yes, obviously the student support services are being diminished, but we don't have the level of staffing that we used to. And put into context there, we have a cost of living crisis, and as those services are stretched, then students... The other thing with students, and this is just my personal observation, is that over the last 2 years, so many more students are having to work alongside studying. And that creates additional pressures for them. And that is a cost of living related issue. And I just don't see that we have enough resources to cope with the demand. It's a real problem. And obviously, when a programme like Adapting for Continued Success comes around, they'll see that the information that's being given by the senior management team, everything will be fine. Well, they said that in relation to the modern languages situation, and we found out that that was never going to be the case. So, I mean, I suppose it's about... The difficulty that we have is getting the students to engage with these types of change programmes. Because, I mean, they're quite scary in terms of what might happen. It's difficult for them to want to engage directly with them, and we're helping with that where we can. But obviously, yeah, I mean, just more broadly, the workload issues that staff are experiencing, and obviously we've had a reduction in the number of staff, but that doesn't necessarily relate to less students. So we're doing more with less. So it's a real concern, and obviously if people are overworked, then their ability to give a great student experience is going to be less, even though I would still say that we do give a great student experience, but it's just under a lot more pressure than it used to be.
So the balance, I suppose, staff are still wanting to and delivering a positive student experience, but that comes at costs to staff, personal, physical, emotional well-being costs. Okay, thanks. Melissa.
Thanks for the question. Well, we have monitored very closely the obviously staff reductions against the student numbers, and it is undeniable that already the staff-students ratio is going up at Dundee with the current colleagues that we have already lost to VS and to, as I said before, resignation and retirement combination of all these factors. And at the moment we're looking at a ratio of academics staff to students that is about 1 in 10. That is the best case scenario, but we know that in some areas these numbers are much higher than that, up to 1 to 35, 1 to 40. And this is also due to the fact that Dundee University also employs a lot of staff on research contracts, and so that skews the measure, if you wish. So there is no doubt that this kind of cuts are going to impact the student experience, and how much more cuts can we tolerate to continue to deliver the experience that students have just now. And there is no question that students are already impacted. You probably have read in the newspapers the experience of students in architectures that fought to keep their tutors when at the beginning of the academic year the university could not make a decision on whether they would have a budget for tutors or not, and that jeopardized potentially the accreditation of the architecture degree. Before the architecture tutors, what we saw was a very similar situation in medicine. So there is a lot of what we call in the sector hidden redundancies that are not really shown in the papers. They don't appear in official numbers. Often is a reduction of hours in terms of tutor contracts, or just an email to say your services are not required anymore. So these are usually staff that are on precarious short-term contracts, often poorly paid, but they do an amazing job at supporting the education that we deliver. So they're invaluable members of staff that have seen their contracts reduced or terminated with very short notice. And these redundancies happen before, as I said, the formal numbers are even put on paper. So we really worry in that sense about the kind of service that we could offer to the students also from a mental health support perspective. At the beginning of the academic year, we had an incident which was fortunately resolved very quickly, where we only had one mental health nurse available, and so all new referrals of students to the mental health services had to be paused. As I said, obviously that was an incident that was resolved very quickly, but we expect that situations like this could arise again in case the university was to go forward with, again, more deeper cuts to staffing.
Thanks, Melissa. Sophia.
Yes, so I already mentioned, larger classes, larger tutorial groups. We've seen cuts to courses. So our geography students, third and fourth year honours students, came back in September to find that fully 1/3 of their optional courses in geography had disappeared, courses on which they were already registered, and they had at last minute to scramble around to find places on some other courses, some of which were already oversubscribed. We tried to challenge those decisions, but there was no real accountability. So we work closely with the Joint Unions at Edinburgh, work closely with our colleagues at the Edinburgh University Student Association. They're very deeply concerned about the impact on student learning and student experience and have been raising these issues in the University Court. And I think it's fair to say that they're frustrated with the lack of management listening on their concerns. And also, we have similar picture to the one Melissa said around hidden redundancies. Now, let's recall that some of these people who do tutoring are also students. And in one part of the university, the PhD students who tutor in that area found that all the hours of paid work that they often depend on to pay rent and to cover their bills had been cut. And that means they have no opportunity for professional development in teaching, which should be part of any PhD researcher's learning journey in the university. They have no means to make a living. And some of these students are also paying fees. So that's quite a shocking example of how these cuts are impacting students. So we need to think about students across the broad range of different students. But larger classes, stressed staff, fewer opportunities for interaction with staff and individual attention really have a very serious impact on student learning.
Thank you. And Stuart?
Well, we're the opposite. So just now, we actually won an award for students' experience for the students. But the UCU and Unison have pointed out that will not happen next year because of the cutbacks. The students will not get the same experience that they had last year due to them having less members or less people to look after students and give them the students' experience. Thanks.
Sophia, you talked about postgrad tutors. Are there other groups of students? I'm thinking about universities' ethical obligations to international students. Are you seeing the promises made or the conditions that they were offered that they came to study here on the basis of changing radically? I don't know if any of you have any comments on the impacts on international students particularly.
Well, inevitably, these matters also have an impact on international students. And in my academic life, I actually do some study of Chinese students and their experience, their migration to the UK for higher education. And I've been saying for many years, based on this research, that too often universities treat these students like cash cows and don't really consider them as students or provide them adequate support. And yes, we've seen sort of support for writing, developing academic writing in English. If you're a master's student, you've never studied in an English medium university before, is a big ask, and you need support. You need people to provide that, and that is the kind of thing that is being cut at Edinburgh because it's sort of optional. So I think the experience for these students will get worse, even when it was already not great.
And my final question on this, do any of you want to comment? A couple of you have mentioned engagement with the students' associations. How, in your view, does university management treat the students? Are they given fair opportunities to engage in decision-making? In the governance structures as well. I know there are formal positions for student reps on court and that kind of thing, but are they actually listened to? Dan?
Yeah, I mean to answer that question, I feel like Adapting Continued Success, the students are getting a very similar treatment that we are, in that there is on the face of it consultation. We will have workshops and meetings, but all the reports from those meetings is that nothing's actually being consulted on or decided. It very much seems like there's a plan, it's going ahead, and these meetings that students and staff can attend are there, so senior management can say, we've consulted on this. But the ability to actually change and influence what's happening is very limited, in my view.
Okay. Melissa, did you want to come in on that briefly?
Yes, I just wanted to reinforce what Dan said. We have a very clear example now in Dundee. The university is engaging in a massive restructuring exercise from schools into faculties, and I feel like students have been given very little voice in that. There have been comments from senior management saying that students don't really care which faculty they belong to, and now we know that the students are going to be given a survey after the deed, because the faculty restructuring has already been approved in principle by court, and therefore is going ahead. And similarly, staff are being consulted with a post hoc survey, and what kind of engagement are they expecting from students? What kind of feedback? If the students were to come back and say, we really don't like this, let's go back to schools, what is it going to happen? I don't think so.
Okay, thanks. I'll leave it there for now.
Thank you. Jackie Dunbar.
Thank you. Good morning. And Mr Forster, I'm going to start with you, since if you don't mind. And if I can just ask, I'm very wary of the time, convener. So if anybody else wants to come in, can you just raise your hands, and then that hopefully will mean that other members will be able to come in. Mr Forster, in a recent letter to the committee, the Minister for Higher and Further Education said that the upcoming letter of guidance would set out that SFC must collate and publish information on principal pay. Can I ask what your views are on that announcement, and what impact do you think it's going to have?
Thanks, Chair. Well, I'll give you, for instance, right, I've been in this university for 50 years. I started off at £3.50 an hour. I'm now on £13.50 an hour. So that's a 20 pence pay rise every year for 50 years. That's the difference. My principal is now on £460,000 a year. So it's a big difference. Right? We're not in it for the pay. We're in it to actually look after the students. Yes, we would like a pay rise, but if it wasn't for the living wage or the national wage, I think the university would actually pay us less for what we actually do. But we are the backbone of the university, the security, the cleaners, and everybody else that looks after the gardeners. We are the backbone of the university, and we still do not get treated what we should be getting. My university pays £21 million a month on salaries, right? £990,000 of that, £990,000 that is on 500 staff who look after university, as in the States, and the rest all goes to salaries above. And I believe that 13 members of the executive committee get £3 million or something. I'm not quite sure, but on a month on that. So they're over £250,000 each. My committee. Now, I think if the university was equal and fair, they'd pay the people at the bottom a standard wage to make it better for them. But I understand that a university is a business, and if a business wants a top man to run their university like any other business, then they have to pay for it. But £460,000 just, I think, is too much. Thanks.
Okay. Ms Woodman.
Unlike the principal, I do know what his salary is. And yes, you might like to know that his remuneration is £375,000, but his total, which includes pension, housing benefit, he's got a free house on Carlton Hill, and with staff, it comes to about £426,000. I say that in part because there's a problem with high pay, not just of the principal, but the growth in high-paid staff in the university, while we face really serious issues of low pay, as Stuart has outlined. People are under the impression that the universities are full of high-paid staff. That really isn't true. Many, for our members, people, the largest group of staff is earning between £40,000 and £60,000. But we have lots of members who are on very low pay, and in the other unions, say Unison, the average is between 20 and 40,000. And so low pay is a serious problem in universities, and even the highest paid people's salaries have been declining in value significantly. Our union estimates about 25% in the last 15 years. But it would be a very good thing if the SFC would look not just at VC's pay, but about high pay in general in the sector.
So it's a nice job if you can get it then. So do you think it would be a positive impact then if they're going to publish it across the board? It takes away the secrecy of which individual principals may or may not be earning, and we could, as you say, maybe help them, tell them how much they earn. So do you see that it could be positive if done in the right way?
I think it would be a very positive move. But I like to say I don't think, university principals are heads of charities. Universities are not a business. And so this idea that they're business leaders and their salaries need to be competitive, I think that is really an indication of something wrong with the narrative around universities in general. Okay. But yes, it would be a very good thing.
Thank you. And Mr. Cutts, I saw your hand.
Yeah. To come in on this, it's really interesting that obviously there's so many casualised staff at our institution, and we're seeing people. I mean, the way that the turnover of staff is at the top level at the moment, but we're seeing continually new people coming in, six-figure salaries all the time. But people at the lower end and casualised staff are getting nowhere near that level of remuneration. The other point that I want to raise is that the pay spine is collapsing. So the 51-point pay spine, the bottom 14 points of that are now the same because of the increases in the living wage. So you've got basically grades 1 to 3 that there's no difference, and they're having to construct differences. So supervisors not being paid the same as the people that they're supervising. And this is you see an issue in that context that needs to be negotiated there. But it hasn't changed since 2006. But it creates a massive problem for people at the bottom end of the pay scale. And yeah, I mean, it's very challenging to see that the justification for this pay when we know so many staff have had to leave the institution. I mean, I think we're recruiting for 3 new VP posts currently, but we have a hiring freeze. So it's very much there's one rule here and another for everybody else. And also there's a pause on promotions at the university at the moment. However, people can join at the top of the institution. It feels hypocritical to me.
Okay, thank you. Sorry, I'm not going to attempt your surname. I've forgotten it.
That's okay.
Apologies.
That's okay.
Melissa.
That's fine. Yes, I just wanted to make 2 points. Well, the very first one around the pay of principals and vice-chancellors. I think, well, there's a report which probably the community is already familiar with, the von Prundinsky report from 2012, so it's already more than 10 years old. And actually it has very good recommendations on that. And because it's not just about the transparency, knowing how much they're paid, but actually fairness across the board. And one of the recommendations in the von Prundinsky report was that percentage increases beyond what other staff are awarded should be abolished, and also bonuses for these higher managers should be abolished unless made in a transparent manner. And by transparent manner also means, for example, involving within the remuneration committees of university staff and students and not having everything decided behind closed doors. So there are already existing recommendations on the way forward. The other thing that I was going to say is this is not just an issue of the pay of vice-chancellors, it's an issue of pay of senior management overall. in the University of Dundee, in the current situation when the university is saying that we need to make large savings on staff costs, the university is restructuring and is creating up to 16 new full-time jobs for assistant vice principals and deputy vice principals, faculty vice principals. While a lot of these jobs used to be roles, so individuals within the university would have an allocated maybe 30, 40, 50% to conduct that role as Associate Dean, for example, research, or Associate Dean education and student experience. Now these jobs are going to be full-time, substantial jobs that the university potentially will have to pay 100,000 top each. So again, it feels very hypocritical that on one side we're telling staff, actually, you're not going to get your pay award, because this is what happened at Dundee. We still have not gotten our pay award. Promotions are frozen, and there is no reevaluation scheme for jobs, but we're going to set up another layer of management with 16 full-time positions, and 4 of them are going to be in UEG. Again, you can imagine what that means in terms of remuneration.
Okay, thank you. Interesting.
Chair, can I come back on that, please, if you don't mind? I was on the committee in 2005 when they opened up the national agreement for pay negotiations and I'm still on the jinxies. The university, when we get a pay rise of 1.4, we automatically go into dispute. And as soon as we go into dispute, they take the table off us again because we're in dispute. So every year we go into dispute, they do not look at the framework agreement. And everybody agrees the framework agreement is broken. The bottom scales, ever since the government brought in the national wage, the voluntary living wage, it's totally destroyed the bottom scales. So people used to have a £450 difference between each of their skills. That's now corroded to 10 pence or 5 pence or 20 pence. And every time we talk about this, they agree it's broken, but every time they offer us a pay rise of 1.4, where the rest of Britain got nearly 3.2 or 3.5, we get 1.4 because we're educational. They then take it off the table again because we're in dispute. So it's a catch-22 situation. It has to be took separate from the negotiations to a different form, and somebody has to tell you see, that's what has to happen, right? And also, they will not allow us a jinxies in Scotland because the Scottish universities vote against it because they all want to be in the same wee club. So we can't even negotiate separate in Scotland on this either, right? All our terms and conditions, we have to still go down to London and talk to them down there. Thanks.
So I'm going to briefly come back, sorry. You said negotiate separately. Do you mean separately for each university or separately as in all Scottish universities?
There are 156 universities in Britain. Scotland has its own universities, but over the years we've been putting in a thing that we used to have our own jinxies in Scotland that we can open up to Scottish universities and say to them, look, there's the spinal column, there's the terms and conditions, there's the old university, there's the new universities, there's the difference between the salaries and all that, and have a proper talk. But the Scottish universities don't want that. They want to stay with the national universities, so they outvote it every time. And they've not got the teeth to say anything because it's the universities that they are managing, right?
So it's the principals and
it's like when it comes to, say, the living wage there, right? 69 universities refused to pay the living wage this year because they couldn't afford it, right? We don't have any say in that. But come April this year, they have to pay it because they're then breaking the law. But they didn't have to pay it. I mean, so it's a catch-22. So if you think about it, if you're on £13.50 or £13, that's nothing to what the people that get at the top. But the people at the bottom are now caught up with the people that had skills, and then it causes animosity down at the bottom between other departments like gardeners, security and all that. Why am I getting paid the same? Right? And it's not the cleaner's fault to say, why am I getting paid as a cleaner? Cleaner's just as vital as anybody else in that university, but it causes animosity amongst the workforce. And it has to be a clear set scale put in forward. Now, the way my university resolved it was give them a 5 pence or 10 pence difference when the £13.50 went, because you couldn't have the same people on the same wage. So you gave them a 10 pence for their skill. So I've got a charge hand cleaner in a grade 3, and I've got a cleaner, and she's only getting paid 45 pence more now. She's 2 grades above to look after all these people, all these skills, and that causes animosity.
Okay, thank you very much.
Thank you. Okay, now there might be an element that comes into what has just been talked about, but from April of next year, 2027, all Fair Work First criteria become conditions of the SFC grant. How effective do members think this will be at bringing about positive changes for the actual staff at universities, please? Anyone with an answer? Yeah, Dan.
Yeah, thank you. So, I mean, Fair Work First looks absolutely brilliant, and we really welcome it. My issue is, and what issue is that we're currently experiencing is so that the senior management team are not following the principles currently. What happens? That's really the question that I have, because yes, we could perhaps withdraw from the signed agreement, but it puts a lot of pressure on us in terms of funding and all of those things, and we would be harming the institution. So, if that makes sense, so would I be the one responsible for my colleagues not getting money and putting jobs at risk because the senior management team are refusing to abide by the principles? So, for me, it's about enforcement. So, what happens if a senior management team refuse to engage on the issues that they're supposed to? And that would be really interesting to know, because I think it does put the unions in a quite a stressful position to see how do we engage with this and take it forward.
Thank you, Melissa.
Yeah, I have a very similar view. That's been our experience at Dundee. The Fair Work principles are brilliant, and it would be excellent if they could be applied fully, and we welcome the extension, of course, of the whole of the FAIR principles. Just now, university have to adhere to a couple of them, but not all of them. So we do welcome that extension, but we have the same issue around compliance. What happens if an institution is not compliant? And it does put a lot of pressure on us. I think sometimes people tend to forget that we are all volunteers, that we're not union officials, and therefore we also have a job that we do at universities, and as part of that job, we really feel for the security of our job and for our colleagues being able to secure funding and continuing their career. So it's really hard. Universities at the moment, in theory, should be abiding by the effective voices principle, which means having a safe environment where dialogue and challenge are welcome. But as you have seen in the Gillies report, and as it continues to be at the University of Dundee, this is not the case. But what happens next? Where do we go? How can we enforce the Fair Work principles?
Okay, thank you, Sophia.
Yeah, obviously it's positive to expand Fair Work, all the Fair Work principles. But I share many of the concerns raised by others, and I guess the key question is monitoring, and what does worker voice mean? And we've already been covered by that principle for some time, but we don't see sufficient meaningful consultation. So the critical aspect is monitoring, enforcement, and that one would hope that would be done in a serious way, and government may have a role in that, in making these principles have more teeth. I guess I want to raise one additional point about equalities, the equalities dimension. And we know from the structure of the higher education workforce that it's deeply unequal, and unequal pay, unequal conditions are a problem in the sector. And the cuts are making this worse. They will inevitably fall most heavily on the most vulnerable and casualised staff, who tend to be predominantly, or a larger proportion of whom are female, ethnic minorities and LGBT and so on. So there's a real question here around the cuts programs and that equalities provision. So that would be one where serious monitoring is really needed in the coming after April, once these come into force, and that is not just a tick box exercise by university managers.
Okay, thank you. Stuart, do you want to say?
We welcome it, but I can't say any more on that because we're still looking at it.
Right, okay. Well, no problem. That's perfectly reasonable. And I think Maggie Chapman wanted to say something about that.
Thanks. Just a couple of follow-ups on the Fair Work principles. You've talked about the challenges of actually the implementation of the existing principles, never mind all of them when they come in April next year. Is there a role for the Scottish Funding Council to make funding conditional on proper implementation of the Fair Work First principles? And do you see that as one of the levers, one of the mechanisms of ensuring management takes these seriously? Melissa?
Well, it's a good point. I think we will fall back into the same kind of issue of then us reporting the institution not following fair principle would jeopardise SFC funding, which is absolutely not what we would want to do. I think maybe, I mean, obviously in here I'm speaking from my perspective. A way forward would be to transform the Fair Work principle into a living document where there are multiple checks on rather than something that gets signed off once a year and then that's it, the university is done with it. Maybe there is space to explore a different approach and having this living document and a living continuous conversation between the SFC, the university and the unions to ensure that the principles are being adhered to.
Are there any other mechanisms that anybody else wants to bring in? Because I understand that challenge. You don't want to be responsible for a cut to funding, but what other levers, what other sticks do we have to ensure management actually do follow the principles they're supposed to? Anybody else want to comment on?
Well, you know, one, I think Melissa's suggestions are great, and I would say that one, you know, a simple thing many universities could do is actually allow unions access to information on all new hires. I mean, we don't have a lot at the moment around the place because of the conditions, but they always used to do that. That's in our recognition agreement, but because of GDPR, they haven't done that. So things like that, and as sort of simple things about access to all staff, some kinds of ways of you know, expanding the role of unions in universities could be quite valuable.
And I suppose linked to that, what do you, and this is my last question on this, what do you see as being important preparation, the preparatory work that needs to be done between now and April 2027 to make sure when they do come in, actually everybody knows what all the principles are and they are ready to implement them, to record them, to monitor them, that kind of thing. What, other than actual proper engagement with the unions, what would be your wishes in this space? Stuart, yeah.
We have a fortnight meeting, so everyone's brought up in business. Then we have the UCU or the joint union every 3 months, and most topics come up in that. But usually, university will give us heads up what's coming up, but then it kind of gets put in the back burner, and then the paperwork come out a day before we're supposed to have the meeting as usual, right? So then they turn and says, "Have you all read it yet?" And you've got about 25 pages in front of you. So that's the way the tactics are with universities.
Okay, so there's something about changing that nature of engagement.
Yeah.
You know, entirely. Any other comments, Melissa?
Well, I think I seem to remember a session of this committee where our principal said that he wasn't familiar with the Fair Works principles. So I imagine that potentially some training for vice principals and vice chancellors on the Fair Work and what it means. Maybe members of court as well. so that everybody's on the same page and what is expected. That could be valuable.
That's helpful. Thanks, Dan.
Yeah, I think the training and getting the university courts involved into this as well would be really effective. I mean, I suspect what's going to happen is that you have to be prepared for coming up against the autonomous university argument. That's going to happen, and we see this. And from my perspective, I'm sort of naturally pessimistic about things, and I just know that that's what's going to be said, and it's how that's treated, and how we can get the best results for everybody, because it is in their interest as well to follow these principles, right?
That point's worth highlighting, so thank you for that.
Miles Briggs.
Thank you, Convener. Good morning to the panel. Thank you for joining us today. A number of my questions have been covered, so I won't go over senior management pay and other issues. But I wanted to ask, to start, how effective do you think your court is for each of your institution in actually knowing what's going on and these decision makings, actually being part of leading that, not just following it? So maybe go down the line and then come in with another question, Dan.
Yeah, I mean, I think the university court, I mean, the way university court is utilised by the senior management team is something that I've always taken issue with, and many of my colleagues would as well. For example, senior management team would take plans to court would decide, well, yes, you go and do that. And then if we want to critique those plans, SMT team will say, well, court have instructed us to do this, we can't change it now. And so we get caught in that nexus continually. And this is a big fear about what's going to happen in relation to adapting for continued success. Obviously, there is some trade union representative and student representative and staff representatives on the courts. I would like to see more of that, more staff, more students, because the way it seems to operate to me is that, and this is no criticism of the people on court directly, it's just the way the system operates, that you have a number of independents. Well, the trade union doesn't get any direct access to those independents, but senior management team do. So if everything's going to work effectively, there needs to be sort of equity in relation to that, to make sure that everyone's hearing from all of the voices, and I suppose it can link back to Fair Work then.
Thank you. Well, I'm sure, again, I'm not going to repeat what the findings of the Gillies report on the functioning of court at the University of Dundee. That was some harrowing reading. I think who controls the information controls the narrative, and unfortunately this is exactly what happens in our university. The information that court receives is often provided by the executive group, and that also means that the narrative is carefully controlled by the executive group, and it relies on court members taking it upon themselves to challenge the narrative and to ask for additional data. Now, from the reports that we get from our court nominees, often these challenges are ignored or minimised, in a way that, or are always the same lonely voices that bring up issues and eventually get sidelined. So there are issues on the way in which courts work. There have been some changes at the University Court in Dundee. We're hopeful that these changes will bring also a change of attitude and more scrutiny. We do know that there's still some issues in terms of, for example, court receiving regular management accounts, or court, for example, seeing cash flow data, or, for example, the publication of court meeting minutes and court minutes of court subcommittees. Again, I'm going to go back to the von Brunziski report because it's old, but it's gold. There was a suggestion there already 10 years ago that the meetings of governance structures in the university, that includes court and senate, should be public. And I think that is more needed than ever. We as staff deserve to see what our nominees or our representatives. I would like to make one one comment specifically because I've read the communication that our principal sent into this committee this morning, and they keep calling the union's nominees representatives. That is not correct. Because a representative would bring the voice of the union into court. But that is not the case. Union nominees are trustees of the institution, just as all the other members of court, and therefore are held to the same standards as any other member of court. So while we do communicate with them, and of course they refer back to us when there is potential issues, they stand on court as independently from their union role in a way. So. Yes, there's a lot to do, but going back to the transparency, I think that we deserve as members of staff to know how our nominees and how our court members and Senate members behave and how they vote and how these governance structures reach the decisions that they reach.
Yeah, well, to give you an example of our university court, at the meeting last summer where it voted to accept management's proposal for this £140 million cut in recurrent expenditure with £90 million cut to staff of the staff budget. Security was so tight that it was actually more extreme than for the visit of the head of the WHO, which happened a couple of days before. So university staff don't even know where the court is meeting. Minutes don't get released until 3 months later at the next court meeting. So we don't know what was discussed in that meeting, which is so consequential for our institution. So that level of secrecy is a really serious problem. I fully share Melissa's view about transparency. And I don't think it used to be this way. It's a shift in recent years, and I'd like to say that one of the key problems is also that university courts are stacked with outside co-opted members. So management and the outside co-opted members always have the overwhelming majority. However hard our staff members and student members on university court work to try to get an alternative perspective presented in court, it tends to be ignored. And actually, a recent court meeting, I think staff and student representatives were actually in tears for not being listened to. And the final point I'd like to make is that the trade unions at Edinburgh have received some financial disclosure after a lot of pressure, and we're told that this is the same level of information that the court is getting. It's inadequate. No management accounts, no cash flow data, none of the kind of workings behind. So I think transparency and also staff and students should have a majority on university courts. That is something the next Parliament could do, is to bring a simple governance reform which makes sense, because academic freedom is also about faculty self-governance, and that is a key principle by which universities ought to be governed.
Stuart, do you have anything?
Yeah, a court is a secret society, let's be honest, right? It's a secret society. I have a member on court who's a lay member. He gets taken to a room before the court goes in. He's told by the vice principal what he can't say nothing, what's going to be said. And when he goes to the committee and listens to what he said, he's not allowed to report it back to the other unions because he has to sign an agreement that he will lose his job because it's totally confidentiality. So I don't understand why we have one on the board anyway. But it's a society, it needs broken. The court has to be open and free with what's happening in universities. And quite rightly, you said, you wait about 6 months before what court is actually published, right? And I have a member sitting there on my committee who can't say nothing what happened in court that day because he would lose his job. And that's how society, how secret it is.
Yeah.
Thanks.
That's very helpful. I think, you know, it's something we've been concerned about, that transparency issue throughout.
Just before you move on to your next point, if I can take in George Adam on that.
Good morning and thank you, Convener. I just wanted, it's ironic you just said that, Stuart, because I just wrote my notes after what Sophie had said. It appears that Edinburgh University Court is a secret society. Well, I didn't put that in my notes.
Sorry.
Just for the record. One of the things I was going to ask was, Sophie, when you spoke about maybe a simple bit of legislation the Parliament could bring in the next session would be to look at transparency. I was on this committee when what you've got was put through, and we were told by those in senior management positions that this would be an absolute disaster because they wouldn't be able to control the court. You know, so it appears that they've managed to find a way to make that happen. So what would your ideas be along these lines if we were looking towards the future about a kind of future bit of legislation that would kind of look at the transparency of the courts? And representation as well, sorry.
Yes, well, representation, I already said, I think there should be a majority of staff and student representation on court. I mean, that just makes sense. It doesn't make sense that the external members, often with no experience in higher education and making decisions on our behalf, and who are not contactable. We don't have.
Yeah. But these were all arguments that were made at the time of when this legislation went through originally, and we were told it was going to be the end of earth, the end of all things, if we went down these kind of lines.
Well, and on transparency, I think that we all understand there may be certain financial data that has to be kept for commercially sensitive reasons. I mean, it should be minimal, and university staff and students deserve that the outcomes of court meetings get published right away. Well, I think it's unconscionable what happened at Edinburgh, that we have this staff, that we have this enormous cut, and all we get is an email from the principal interpreting what happened until the court meeting in September, when they finally approved the minutes. So transparency, what exactly that would mean, I would need to go away and ask some of our staff reps on court what they would recommend, but I'm happy to follow up with the committee, and I'm sure other university union reps will likewise have really good suggestions. But I mean, the other thing is those external members should be contactable. They don't have an email, and we got when. At one point last year, when we were trying to, in fact, this was around divestment, the divestment campaign at Edinburgh, try to find the emails of these external members, and this was seen as a big problem. I mean, they're on our governing body. They should be at least contactable.
Stuart, did you want to...
All we need is a voice. I mean, every committee's got a voice. You've given us a voice here today, so I don't see why our court can't give us a voice as well. And when you take the university, when we're taking our pension offers, and the principal and the executive committee went to the court and said, we need this money, this is the reason we need the money. We had people sitting there saying, you don't really need this money, why are you taking our pension offers? You've got over £200 million sitting in the bank, but you still want this money, right? We couldn't even say nothing on that. And they persuaded the court, for the good of the university, they got our pension, and the court voted for that. Whereas we didn't have a voice to turn and say, there's the reasons why we're kicking back on you. This is the reason we don't think the university needs the money. You've got £400 million worth of assets sitting out there. You've got a place called Ross Priley, it's sitting there doing nothing, a golf course. Why do you need that for? Why not just sell that off and keep jobs? So we don't even get a say on it. The court should be open and transparent to anybody and everybody in the university, even to students, the whole lot. It should be there for people to listen to, because it's a university. The university should be run as a university, not as a private function, and for people to have a back say on what's happening in the universities.
You wanted to come in?
Yeah, thank you. I don't have a lot to add, but I just wanted to say that I'm sure this Parliament and the UK Parliament, as well as our union, sometimes debate more controversial things that our courts debate. And if this Parliament and the UK Parliament can sit in public and can be broadcasted to all of the public, I don't see why courts and Senate in our institutions can't do the same. Of course, there will be exceptions that will have to be specifically defined through a code on how those exceptions can be identified, and those could be taken into a private session. But there is no reason, considering that we now have the technology, why courts and senates cannot broadcast their meetings to all staff.
Mr. Cutts.
Yeah, I'll just be brief. For me, it's about trust. And any sort of attempts to have less staff and less students on there implies that we're untrustworthy in some way. Why would you not want to listen to more people that are actually actively engaged in the institution? I don't see the reason not to. Oh.
Thank you. Back to Miles Briggs.
Yeah, no, there was a lot of useful information there, and I think, my real concern and where I think the Scottish Funding Council should be around the transparency issue around this is actually live information around institutions' finances, not annual reporting. A lot of Oscar's work with charities around this would be way more transparent. So I think we need to see a piece of work like that done in the next session. I wanted to move on in terms of the Scottish Government and University Scotland's launch of a framework for sustainability and success of Scotland's universities, and just wanted to ask what engagement the unions have had to date, and if they haven't, what you would like to see that look like. So I'll maybe start with yourself, Stuart.
It's good for the government to actually notice this for a change, because we were not in the headlights for ages. You've concentrated on colleges, you've gave them a nice lump sum over the next 3 years, but because we're not part of the government, we don't get the same treatment. I'd like to see that the Scottish Government come up for election, or whatever gets put in, work with universities to go forward to make sure that universities are sound and are in a proper position to look after the staff and the students. Thanks, Chair.
Well, I think it's very positive to launch this review, and I think the proposal is that there be union representation on it. I think that would be excellent, and there should be representatives of all the unions that are representing workers in higher education. And again, I hope that that process can be open to submissions from unions of ongoing concerns.
Yeah. Anyone else want to come in on that?
No, I would support what Sophia just said. All unions should be represented on that panel, and it would be really helpful if maybe that panel could, when needed, get also some information from reps like us that are not necessarily involved with the, they're not necessarily officials of the union, but if the panel needs specific input, it would be good if we could get it also from local reps.
Yeah, I agree.
Sure. Yeah, and I think for those of us who have been calling for that, who are working with the steering group on that, it's really important that we have this broad offer put forward. Some of it will be very challenging, but the next Parliament will have to pick this up to make our university sector sustainable. And so I think that what's coming out of that, making sure the unions have collectively had their voice in there, is important. I think that's all from me, Convener. Thank you.
John Mason. We've got a change over operators at the moment.
I think your other mic's on.
That's me. Thanks very much. Thanks, Convener. Yeah, maybe I can touch on one or two issues that we've covered already. I mean, we heard from certainly Dundee and Edinburgh, the principals or senior staff, that basically they didn't have a good control over the costs and what was actually happening in the university. I think slightly different cases. I think Edinburgh, it was because there was a lot of decentralisation, is it different schools or different faculties, and the centre didn't seem to know what was going on. And costs were just allowed to drift, and it appeared that staff numbers just increased, and nobody kind of looked at it. So is there an argument, in a sense I'm being devil's advocate perhaps here, but is there an argument that some of the universities just got a bit bloated, took on more staff than they should ever have had, and now they're just coming back to what should be the normal level of staffing?
I'm happy to answer that because, again, we've been looking very closely at staffing levels. At the moment, at the University of Dundee, we are at the lowest staff numbers we've ever been in 20 years. During the time when Dundee was achieving incredible, well, not incredible, but substantial increases in student fees, the staff numbers did not change that much. The average of FTEs was always around 3,000. For the past 20 years, you can go back, we've gone back to 2007, so we looked at all the staffing numbers, and they've been pretty much stable around 2,900, 3,000 staff. Now, it is true that in 2024, there's been a jump in staff numbers, but that's only about 260 FTEs. And now we're way below that because we've lost about 490 FTEs through the voluntary severance and through, as I said before, retirement and resignations and so on. So this narrative that the University of Dundee is overinflated in terms of staff, I completely disagree with that. I think the other trade unions would also disagree with that. And in fact, if we were to go ahead with what has been planned in the University Recovery Plan for the University of Dundee, we would almost halve the staffing numbers. Now, the question that I'd like to ask this committee is, how do you deliver the same Dundee experience and the same programs and courses that we've delivered over the past 20 years with half of the staff?
And yet the numbers have to add up. The income can't be less than the expenditure, can it?
I'm sorry, I'm not sure.
Well, the university's accounts, they have to balance.
Yeah.
I mean, they can't make a loss year after year after year, so the costs have to be kept at the same level as the income, don't they?
I do agree with that. Now, the question here has been very much of a vision. So we have a current leadership that has portrayed a university in the University Recovery Plan that is a shrinking university with falling student numbers. And those are all assumptions that you make in order to project the future deficit. So if you are very pessimistic on your view, that comes out in the numbers. Now, that doesn't mean that those numbers necessarily will materialize and that the deficit will be as large as it is predicted. That predicted deficit has all sorts of underlying assumptions, and the underlying assumptions are that we're shrinking, that there is no space for growth, that the capital expenditure would be X amount, which the University Executive Group has clearly identified in the recovery plan, without specifying which capital expenditure they're going to engage in.
Although the capital expenditure wouldn't immediately hit the profit and loss account, I mean, the capital expenditure would be separate, wouldn't it?
Well, yes, but it will eventually, balance.
Right, can I move on
impact.
then to?
But yeah, so staff now, in terms of staff numbers, we are at the lowest we've ever been.
That's a good bit of information to have. Would Edinburgh be the case? Lowest staff numbers?
Staff numbers, as I think I said at the beginning, last year to this year declined by almost 800, with some gone to voluntary severance. But Edinburgh is enormous. The idea that it's too decentralised, we do a lot of different things. We have a medical and vet school, we have a school of education, we have an art school, and the idea that you make rules for all of those, or centralise services for all of those, it doesn't make a lot of sense, because they do very different things.
Yes, I agree with that. But would you agree that every bit can't have the expenditure higher than the income?
Well, what we do know is that I can check the time period, but in recent years, we've seen something like over 30% growth in people paid over £100,000 a year. Yeah. So there's been higher growth in that kind of area than in other
and do you know about the
areas
staff numbers?
Of staffing.
Say over the last 10 years, have the staff numbers increased or fallen or stayed the same?
Yes, I don't have the last 10 years.
Well, 5 or whatever.
But they have increased, but not massively. I mean, so academic staff from 2021 to 2025-26, 2021 8,140. This is headcount rather than FTE. This year 8,535. So that, and then professional services, the same time period. 7,135 to 8,575. So the growth is not massive, and in the meantime, you know, we've massively grown the student population over the last 10 years. Edinburgh's gone from about 35,000 students to almost 50,000.
Yeah,
so
I
inevitably you need more people.
Yeah. Okay. Mr. Cut, sorry, I've forgotten how you pronounce this. Is it Cutts or Coots? Cutts is fine. You touched earlier on about this issue of the university being a kind of autonomous institution in answer to previous questions. And the committee's kind of struggled with this a bit because we don't know at what stage the ONS or whoever it is would come in and say, oh, the government's interfering too much. I mean, I don't know if you've got a good kind of handle on that. Do you think we, Parliament, the government, could interfere a bit more and it would be okay? Or do you think we're at risk of the universities losing their autonomy?
Yeah, I mean, obviously, when we're thinking about the university, it's not just the university court, it's also the Senate, right? So there's different structures there that will operate. And Senate is supposed to have autonomy over academic research matters. Whether it's consulted consistently or not is a separate thing. But I think you have to try. You have to see how far you're going to get, because obviously, from what we're hearing today, that the system is not functioning in the correct way. If we're looking at staff numbers, right? So every member of staff is facing increasing workloads, right? So even if staff numbers reduced, right, to have some sort of marketized view of how things should balance up, those people are overworking, and I hear stories all the time of people putting in way over what they're supposed to at work.
Do you not think that's just part of society? I mean, we hear the same from the NHS, we hear the same from schools. Is that not just part of life?
Well, I mean, there's health and safety legislation around this, right? So if you've not signed out of the Working Time Directive, you shouldn't be working over 40 hours a week. Many people in higher education have not signed out of the Working Time Directive, but they are forced, in order to maintain their career, to deliver for students, have to work over that. Some of them 30, 40 hours over what they're supposed to work per week. And that is the whole sector. And I'm sure colleagues on the table would be able to tell you stories like this. So, yes, I know, if you want to work hard and get some recognition for it, I completely get that point. But what we're seeing is, if the funding isn't keeping up and staff are working more and more, there's no give in the system.
Yes.
People can't work more if they're already at the maximum. So, it's very difficult. And obviously, the way that...
So how much should the university be able to decide how it spends its money, because that's come up already? Or should we be interfering more and saying, well, you can only spend so much on capital and pay more in wages, or get into that kind of detail?
The core mission of the university it would be set out to deliver education, research, and for Aberdeen, support the community at home and internationally now in the way that we're functioning. So once those things start to become under threat, I think you have to step in. I don't see where we're going if there isn't this attempt to step in. I know senior management teams will be very quick to try and oppose any interference, but where are we going to end up in the next 5-10 years?
Yes. But I mean, the colleges are in the public sector and they're also struggling. Can't get money for cladding, can't get money for RAC, all of that kind of stuff. So it's not a magic bullet to be in the public sector, is it?
Well, it's very challenging, yeah. I accept that. But something has to work, right? We don't want to lose any institutions in any universities in Scotland. But that's not what we want. Because once they're gone, and all the issues around cold spots will start manifesting. We want to give world-leading education, be internationally recognised. These are core things that we want to achieve. And, I mean, I think the issue that I have with the way the senior management team operate is that it's too focused on the commercialisation aspect, right? And the way universities operate, they cross-subsidise at various points. Aberdeen's been there a very long time. Things have popularity, and it's about having long-term views. The problem that you have is that everything's about the yearly accounts. What's our deficit this year? Oh, it's looking too high, it's too low. But these institutions have been here some for hundreds of years.
So is this framework for sustainability and success, could it sort it? Is it going to sort it?
If there's correct engagement and people are listened to effectively, I'd like to think we'd be able to work towards something that's better.
And what would your key hopes be in this process?
Yeah, it's a good question. Don't think I've got an answer. Well, obviously, sustainability is achieved and we can continue to deliver what we need to. But, yeah.
I haven't asked you, Mr First. I'll come back, Ms Woodman.
Sorry,
because you said earlier on, which I was interested in, you thought there should be more public money going into universities.
Yes.
But, I mean, we've got Edinburgh and Glasgow, which are fabulously rich. Why should they get extra money?
Right, so it's a catch-22 situation. If we were in the government body, what we call it, they got a 4.2 pay rise this year, along with another 3 years, because that's what you gave to the colleges this year, right? Because we are earning. Universities are all intolerable. 156 universities in Britain are their own person. They don't listen to anybody else. They're their own wee castle in the middle of nowhere, saying that this is how we run the university. They take the money in and then they give it out. You just said earlier on, my university paid out £21 million a month in wages. Government gave us £177 million £117 million tax-free this year because we were a charity to pay for Scottish students. But my university had to pay £29 million out of their own pocket to educate them. So
if they've got it in their pocket, why not?
But why should we have to pay for somebody that the government or whatever government's in body has to put forward to educate a Scottish student? Why should my university be paying for this?
But if Strathclyde University's got deep pockets and could pay for it, and the NHS can't for its staff, surely the government's got to put the money into the NHS, not into the university. Right,
so as I say, it's a catch-22 situation. You think that you've seen my university, most universities have got money in the pocket, but some universities don't have the money in the pocket. But for them to pay for Scottish students, but they shouldn't have to pay for Scottish students, it's actually putting a burden on the other universities. Right? So why should we, at the end of the day, lose jobs or lose things because we have to pay for something that whatever government is, okay, is having to make us pay for? That's what I don't get my head round about. Like, you turn and say it's free education for students in Scotland. It's not, because we're paying for it.
Well, someone's paying for it, yeah.
Yeah, right, thank you. But the point is, you're paying so much and we're paying so much. Why should we, as a university, pay to educate students when it's your job to pay to educate the students, not us? That's my argument, sorry, and I'll leave it at that.
I get that argument.
Right, yeah.
There's obviously different arguments.
Yeah.
So, now, you made a good point there, I thought, about, some of the universities are not as well off as others. Do you think...
Take Abertay, they're 90% have government funding. They don't have the same outcome that we have.
Glasgow Caledonian would be the same, and University of West of Scotland. Do you think we should be maybe focusing our money more on the poorer universities and less for the richer universities?
Well, see, we did say we were going to go to Parliament and turn and say, like, if you take Oxford, Cambridge and all these places get billions upon billions of pounds. Why can't big universities put some money into a pot to help other universities out? But that's not going to happen because they're their own society. When we go to UCEA and say to them, why is that university struggling? How can that university in the same area not help them out? they get told the same, it's their money, nothing to do with us. Glasgow University to stop a strike going ahead this year is paid everybody a pay rise to stop them going on strike or take strike action. Right? This is how the universities work. They're on artillery. Yeah. Right? So it's a catch-22 situation. If we were in the government, I'd be sitting here happy because I had a 4.2 pay rise this year. We're not in the government, so the university gives us 1.4, well below inflation. We're 17.5% just now behind inflation on university staff, because we do not get recognised by the universities, because we're either in the government or we're not in the government. It only suits the university when it wants to.
Okay.
And the only reason,
let me move on to someone else now.
Right. I've had my rant, sorry.
Okay. Ms Woodman, I mean, this kind of longer-term picture, what you see coming from the framework of sustainability and success, and you can touch on it with that if you want. But
this is a tricky problem to unpick, because I think all our unions think are strongly supportive of free tuition for Scottish students, continuing that system. My union, UCU, thinks that there should not be tuition fees. Universities are education is a public good. And that needs to be refocused. The marketised system has failed. As I said, I think, Edinburgh is one of the winners from this system, and it's still doing this to its staff and students. So it's a clear indication that this system has failed. At the current point, I think government does need to provide more funding. Of course, the nurses and doctors who work in the NHS are trained in colleges and universities, as well as so many other professionals in our society, and that is a public good.
Edinburgh University has more reserves than the Scottish Government.
I know.
So why should the Scottish Government be giving Edinburgh University more money?
I was going to come to that in a sec.
Okay, right.
In that I think, government can create better frameworks for universities in this current context. And one area would be reserves. The trade unions at Edinburgh have been asking again and again, you have such enormous reserves, why can't you use some of them as a rainy day fund to afford to, if you need to rebalance expenditure and income, you claim, we dispute that claim, but you can use some of those reserves as a rainy day fund. And I think as a charity, that is what they should be doing. So that is the kind of issue that government frameworks could address. And I think also perhaps something around the distribution of students. It might be funny to hear me in Edinburgh saying that, because we are the beneficiary of, in a way, the decline of other universities, in that we suck up students from everywhere. But I think a return to a bit more of a planned economy of students would be helpful for everybody, and is something also that government could consider as a way of kind of, you talk about sustainability, you need kind of plans over time. Yeah. Your committee heard from vice-chancellors last summer saying, these are slow things. Creating a new programme, attracting new groups of students, educating students. It's a long process. So
okay,
you
I'm
need
going to have to draw this to
sustainability.
Close at this point. But thanks very much, all of you. I'll go back to
Thank you. Paul McLennan.
Microphone, that's better. I just want to make an observation just on the point that John Mason made and George Adam made, and I want to start then talking about the tertiary education bill and how that kind of looks. But a couple of observations, I think, for me. One is kind of going back to the discussion around about the Higher Education Governance Bill way back in 2016. And that was meant to give a more balanced, I suppose, way in terms of this. Now, what we've heard all morning, and I kind of touched on this earlier on, was talking around about there's lack of transparency from the universities themselves. There's lack of governance and your involvement in that. There's a lack of respect. And I think that's one of the key things. I think what you're kind of asking for is also increased cooperation. I think in terms of, and more kind of co-production. It's not just, and I think it was yourself, Melissa, that kind of said, and here's the fait accompli. and we want your views on it. So I'd be keen just very briefly on your thoughts on that, because I think going back to 2016, what was in the bill then hasn't been achieved, and we're here 10 years later, quite obviously, in terms of that. And some of the issues, I think, going back, and we'll probably touch on Dundee University probably later on, are indicative around about that lack of transparency, that lack of co-production. So I'd be keen to pick up just very briefly on the points on that. And do you think the 2016 Governance Act then about higher education has achieved its goals? It was set out in 2016, because I think that's a key learn from where we are now. So I'd be keen, probably come to yourself first of all, Sophia, just on that, and then I'll kind of open it up. Then I'll start talking about the tertiary education bill. But there's a clear message for me coming all the way through today in the evidence you're given about the lack of respect, lack of transparency, lack of consultation.
Well, I think the bill's articulation of standards on academic freedom have been very important, but I think that the dimension of academic freedom as self-governance and academic autonomy and the role of academics in running institutions of further and higher education in particular is crucial, and that part was kind of missing, in my view, from the bill. So there's clearly more to be done, and there's obviously been a conflict between this kind of push to marketisation and the focus on financial interests of universities and their core mission that further legislation needs to address.
Yeah. Melissa, I'll probably come to yourself, because I think the key message coming through is that there's lack of consultation, obviously, with the students, but also lack of consultation with the unions as well. But I don't know if you want to expand on it. I know we'll come on to Dundee probably more separately in some other questions, but in terms of just that general principle that's there.
Yeah, so I think, well, one of the main takeaway from the Gillis report was that the existing governance codes were up to scratch. So the problem does not lie specifically within the guidance or the financial memorandum or the Scottish Code for Good Higher Education. Those codes were up to scratch. The problem is around compliance. And as part of the compliance, we've had this discussion around the Fair Work Agreement, is the engagement with staff and trade union representatives and with students. I mean, despite the Gillis report, and this is, I say this, with a heavy heart, but despite the Gillis report and despite the agenda, the items that the University Executive Group put forward in response to the Gillis report, so their own action plan that they should have followed, well, consultation is still lacking, and real, true consultation is still lacking. In our communication to this committee, we did highlight how the university recovery plan was given to the unions a day before it was being submitted to the SFC, and the union representatives did make suggestions on the plan, particularly around the engagement area, which again we come back to the same topic. And I'll let the committee guess how many of those changes were incorporated in the final submission. So and after that, after the SFC wrote to the university and said, well, you're interims, you can't make these long-term decisions, you need to involve staff and students and trade unions in this process. And the unions together have held a series of town halls throughout this period that I like to think have been really helpful for staff, because that's been one of those places where staff have gotten information that weren't directly coming from management communication, and it was very clear that staff wanted to contribute. A lot of our staff are proud to work for the University of Dundee. They really feel that connection, and they wanted to work with the University Executive Group to rebuild the university. They were given no opportunity to do that. The listening exercise should have been part of it, but while there were I think 5 questions, if I remember correctly, the ones related to the well-being were published immediately and made available to staff, but the 2 ones that were around the income generation and how do we rebuild, this university, those ones have not been published. Management keep telling us that they're looking at them and they're thinking about it, but we don't have a lot of time to think. The point was that the funding that we were going to receive from the Scottish Government would have given us a time to think about how do we grow out of this crisis, as well as how do we balance our books. And the approach from management seems to have been we do nothing or we cut all staff, but there is something in between that. We can involve unions, students and staff to put forward ideas, which some of them are already there and have been part of the task force led by Sir Alan Langland. So despite all these action plans, sorry, I made a big detour there, but despite this action plan and one of the actions in this plan is meaningful consultation and relationship with the union. Well, again, the university has submitted 4 documents, I understand, to the SFC in December. We have had no sight of that. And we've asked for them after the submission. We still do not have sight of them. So from our perspective, nothing has changed. How do you change this? Well, we have put forward a proposal. I think from our side, it needs a rewrite of the governance structure. And we have to admit that the experiment of the marketization of this managerialism of higher education has failed. It started probably 15 years ago, 20 years ago. Before 2009 in Dundee, we had elected deans, and they would be elected among staff that had a clear understanding of the university, its challenges and its strength, and they would serve for 5 years, renewable for another 5 years, and then they would go back to the community. And I think that is a very key point, that any change that you make as a principal or as a dean, you will be subjected to that change when you go back to work amongst your colleagues. And also, if you lose the trust of your colleagues within those 5 years of your first mandate, you're not going to be elected again. And that creates accountability. So we have to accept that it was an experiment. It lasted about 15 years. It has failed. It has created a top level of management that often do not teach and do not do any research in our institutions. And here we are.
I think that's really powerful. Dan, Stuart, I don't know if you want to add anything else on that. I think, Stuart, if you want to come in.
I think the university treats you like it treats the unions. We listen to you, we hear what you've got to say, but it's still my business, and we'll carry on what we're doing. And I think that's the way they do it. I think they listen to what we've got to say. Yes, we'll take things on board that we might have to do, but it's still my institution, and I'll run it the way I want to run it, because I'm not governed by you or the unions.
I think that's a really powerful message we've got from all of you there. I want to move on to the set.
Thank you for your evidence that you've given so far. I do appreciate it, and I understand the frustrations. Over this period, we've taken lots of evidence in the committee, and trying to get to the truth of affairs is really quite challenging. And sometimes these are very complex matters. But there have been quite a lot of reforms in recent years in terms of having an elected chair, for instance, at the various universities. And that's not been a roaring success. What's your observation about the recent reforms over the last few years about the elected chairs, about the recent tertiary education bill, which has brought greater oversight for the Scottish Funding Council? What are we not getting that you think needs to change, and what's your comments about what's happened so far? Melissa?
Oh, thank you. Thank you for the question. I think we've covered quite a lot of the things that we would like to see. I think the tertiary education bill, of course, it's not my expertise, so I'm not going to comment directly on whether it's good or bad. It's not my place. I do I do think that in some points it could have gone a little bit further, and then it is probably what is coming across in the debate that we're having today. So obviously, some of the changes are very welcome, and then extended powers to the SSC as well are very welcome. But we do need to seriously think about governance and what is the best for governance. I do find that the election of the chair of court is a positive.
Is it?
Is a positive. No, it is. I think it really is.
We had an elected chair in Dundee, and the elected chair in Dundee did not see the problems coming.
Yes,
why was that?
I agree with that. So I think for a long time, staff disengaged, and students have. There's always very low levels of votes for the chair of court and the chair of for the chair of court. So I don't think that staff have always engaged fully with the process. And the crisis at Dundee has really highlighted how important it is instead to engage with the process. And in fact, I think that I wouldn't want to provide the wrong data, and I'm happy to rectify if I'm wrong, but I think that the latest election of the chair of court has been a lot more participated than in previous years. So while it's not a silver bullet, it doesn't fix anything, but if staff and students do understand the importance of the chair of court, then the election is a good thing.
You could argue that the election of the court chair at Dundee was part of the problem. Could you not? I mean, how do we know that we won't return to that? Because it was appalling. Honestly, the evidence that we received from Amanda Miller was appalling. She had no idea what was happening at the university. Surely that's not a good example of the democratisation that you're talking about? I think
those are two slightly separate issues. Well, first of all, staff cannot vote for anyone. So the candidates that are put in front of staff are vetted by committees and by the selection panel. So we cannot just vote for anybody, or staff cannot nominate people that they would like to run for chair of court. So the choice is restricted, and maybe we could have a conversation around whether there should be more participation of staff in the selection process of the candidates for the chair of court. I think that is a fair point. The democratization system I'm talking about is more around the deanship and vice principals and principals and chancellors of the university, because it is very different having someone come in from the outside with their own biases, potentially very little understanding of the institution, again, of its strengths and weaknesses. And it takes time. We've heard that so many times as union members, as the top leadership, which was changing quite frequently in the last year, that someone would come in and would say, I'm sorry, I'm just finding my feet. It's my second day, it's my third day, I don't really know about this. And at the time, we needed someone that would hit the ground running. But this continues to repeat over and over as we churn all of these interims. So the democratization of the system is more about what Sophia was referring to, the academic freedom of self-governance, this idea that if you are part of the institution, and of course it has limitation, I accept that would limit the talent in a way that you would be able to select. And this is also why, again, in the Von Brzezinski report, they don't go as far as suggesting that all these positions should be elected. They had some concerns at the time around the quality and the type of candidates that you would get who would always be internal. So there are challenges to that. But I think it's time to maybe review whether this managerialism experiment in higher education has actually worked, and whether we should go back to a hybrid system or go back to what it actually was at the time when we had elected deans and elected... obviously, you can't elect everybody in UEG. I would like to have a director of people and a director of finance that, know what they're doing and they come from professional background, but I don't see why not. In fact, at the University of Dundee, we're seeing a reversal of that. While the restructuring into faculties was sold to staff as something that was not possibly going to save us a lot of money, but it was a matter of representation and voices. So the faculties would all have a vice principals that would sit on UEG. And instead, what we are witnessing at the moment on the ground is that UEG got another 4 mouthpieces that are going into the faculties and telling staff why their feedback is wrong.
Okay, thank you. Stuart?
Well, let's be honest, it's an all pals act, isn't it? You vote for me, I'll let you into the chair. They know who the person's going to be in the chair. I'm sorry, but and we done the vote in our 2 places. The university put out the 2 people, and the principal really encouraged us to vote for that person who's going to become the chair, right? Because that person knew about the university, looked after the university. So to me, it's an all pals act. I'm sorry. Right.
Thank you, Stuart.
Yeah, I was going to say something about our University Senate, where the requirement for elected membership has really made a difference, but it has been an enormous struggle, with a culture of managerialism, and a culture of not listening to Senate when it does make determinations, as I said at the beginning. The vote of no confidence in management's financial proposals has not been responded to. So there are challenges, and I think it's also a problem of internal faculty self-governance below the level of University Court and Senate. In such a big institution as Edinburgh, you need multiple layers of faculty self-governance. And we're in the situation where leaders at college level and at school level they have management committees and so on, but there are no kind of real structures of representation that have that kind of faculty self-governance at their heart. So that is a serious problem. I was in London yesterday talking about a very different topic, and a friend who is from Belgium said they elect their VCs, and as Melissa said, elect like sub-level people, deans and so on. I mean, that would be very positive, I think, because they have a level of accountability towards colleagues and a requirement for openness.
It's really a supplementary to Mr McLennan, so unless Mr Kurtz has got a particular point to make, I'll hand back to Mr McLennan.
Just before we do, I have a supplementary to Willie Rennie's supplementary. The 2016 Act stipulates that you can't have elections to the chair of court position unless you have more than one candidate. And Ms DeCenso, you say in your submission that actually part of the problem at Dundee is the number of interim positions. We were told by the interim principal and vice-chancellor that he is in post for longer because he can't get a full-time chair of the court to start the process to get a full-time principal and vice-chancellor. So this all seems to be getting muddled up in this process. Is that specific requirement of the 2016 Act that you must have more than one candidate a good thing, a bad thing, or something that you don't have much use on?
I think you can't pass a judgment in principle. I think it's a good thing that in an election you have more than one candidate. I would challenge anybody to say the opposite.
But if you can't get the candidate and then is keeping vacancies open for longer, potentially you will have a situation where just someone who really doesn't want the job puts themselves forward so you can have an election to get over that barrier. And therefore the question is, should that barrier be there in the first place?
I think in the end, in Dundee, we resolved that issue. There were 3 candidates and they were all 3 appointable, and staff voted for the best candidate. And I think, we will see whether that has worked. But I appreciate the fact that obviously in Dundee that delayed things. That doesn't mean, though, that the interim chair could not have initiated the processes of recruiting a new principal. Meanwhile, a new chair of court was being selected for. I would reject that argument.
Okay, Ms Woodman.
Yeah, I'd like to raise a different point about chair of court and so on. Some people may recall a few years ago during COVID, we had a really marvellous chair of court, Deborah Kayembe, human rights lawyer, who did a really great job of reaching out to staff, students in very difficult times. Now, I mean, getting somebody like that is great, but how many people can take on an unremunerated position? She didn't even really get an expenses allowance. She was supposed to go around representing the university, and that was a real challenge. So there is a question about the way the structure of these positions makes them excludes people who are not sort of, independently wealthy and can take time or retired or whatever to do such a job which is quite onerous, especially in difficult times. So that is something that the unions at Edinburgh have asked for, because the candidate pool becomes very small, because good people who might do an excellent job are excluded because there isn't any remuneration at all, even expenses at times.
Okay, thank you for that. We'll now go back to Paul McLean.
Thanks, Convener. I think that question certainly generated some food for thought for us all there in terms of... I want to take a slightly different tact and is around about the tertiary education and training bill. And obviously, I think we had some feedback that there's I suppose the ability to implement the changes. So I suppose that my thoughts would be, what's your views on the bill? What are the opportunities, but what are the risks? In terms of, I don't know who wants to come in and talk around about that. I know it's a separate issue from what we just talked about, but I think it's a really important one. So I don't know who wants to come in and talk about that, first of all. If not, I'll maybe pick on somebody, or maybe go to Sophia first of all then in terms of that. But I know it's relatively recent, but what you've got your initial thoughts on.
Well, I guess... yeah, it's hard to have a view. It's so recent, so I can't say a lot. But I did think that it was a missed opportunity not to address the governance issue. But more attention, more funding, expansion of the role of the SFC to broader issues is really welcome and positive.
Okay, so Melissa, Dan, Stuart, do you want whoever wants to come in?
Sorry, I was actually going to ask it because you referred to some feedback that you received, and whether you would like
I suppose there was concerns
comments
from the sector about implementing the changes at a time of especially at the time of financial uncertainty. I suppose putting a little bit more pressure on universities.
I guess I am unclear how the implementation of the bill cross path with the financial issues. So I don't know if you could clarify that, maybe if you have very specific feedback that you would like us to comment on.
Nothing specific, it's just more general feedback in terms of that. But that's fine. Dan, Stuart,
I think if I can add one thing, if the University of Dundee can engage in a massive restructuring at a time of financial difficulties, I think they can implement the requirements of the bill.
Yeah. Dan, Stuart, anything to add?
All universities will turn and say they're financially broke. That's why they can't implement anything you want to put forward. And they'll always turn and say until we get a financial settlement or something from the government maybe to help us go through this system, then I think that's it'll be a catch-22 situation.
Coming back to that, Stuart, I mean, because again, is this down to, I don't know if there was much discussion with yourselves in terms of the bill and the implications of that. But Dan, do you want to comment on that particular point? Again, could maybe come back to, was there enough discussion with you around about this?
Yeah, I mean, with UCU more broadly, or
UCU more broadly?
Yeah, so UCU obviously put in a number of recommendations that I don't know exactly what was picked up and what wasn't. But obviously it's good to see these things being discussed, and it is important. I mean, again, I'm a pessimist. I'll see how this works out in future. Yeah.
Okay, thanks, Convener.
Thank you. We'll go to George Adam now.
Thank you, Convener. Good morning to everyone again. I'd like to ask about income generation and financial stability of the organisations. And the UCU said in their written report that trade unions have highlighted staff proposals for income generation, and but they're not being considered at all. Could you give me any specific examples of any time that this has happened and demonstrate how they would actually help with the sustainability and create income for the university? Anyone?
I'm happy to go first because we did that work at Dundee, both as part of the task force that was led by Sir Alan Langland. We had a workshop on income generation, and I was fortunate enough to attend that. And also, obviously, looking at the listening exercise and the kind of responses that staff also have put forward to the union as part of the task force workshop. And as part of the task force workshop, at the time, the Vice Principal for Enterprise and Economic Transformation, Dr. David Macbeth, led the workshop by saying that there were a series of instances where the university seemed to lag behind the sector in terms of income, and one of them was continuous professional development. That seemed to be that UAD was only making 2% of the total income, research income from CPD. Where there were examples in the sector of university that are making like 20–50% of their total research income. He said in that meeting that the university was missing a trick in that sense, and that we could develop some of these CPDs to generate income and expand the expansion on consultancy work again. Dr. Macbeth at the time identified that as a point that could have been addressed and expanded upon. But also there were loads of suggestions from staff, not only on new courses and new potential student markets, but also in terms of, for example, using better conferencing facilities, having a better strategy to profit from hospitality. Unfortunately, in the university, we've seen in the past few years a push towards outsourcing a lot of these services that effectively harm the university. Hospitality is one of them. Hospitality works in a way that if the university puts forward a hospitality service, schools and directorates would spend their own money, so money that sometimes will come from a funder for events, on university services. And outsourcing that kind of service actually means that that money, instead of being recirculated internally to the university, it goes outside. Similarly, we've had examples of that, for example, with the electrical team being outsourced. And so there were, on one side, suggestions to reduce costs for the university, but also suggestions on how to grow income. And none of these suggestions, I accept that argument, none of these suggestions are going to solve the deficit at once. But if you have a portfolio of suggestions, you could definitely generate enough revenue to address at least the bulk of our deficit. Some of it, half of it, has already been addressed by staff reductions through the voluntary severance scheme. Now, we don't know at the moment, because we couldn't verify the numbers, how much saving has come also from those other colleagues that have left the university through retirement, through resignation, as I mentioned before. We've only learned the actual numbers in November, through the correspondence of the principal to this committee. And we have been asked as unions for those numbers for months, because we knew that on the ground, it feels that we're losing a lot of colleagues, and it was impossible that we had just lost 200 or so. So, yes, all of these suggestions have been put forward, and it's been really disappointing that in the university recovery plan that has been submitted in August, some of these ideas are included in the narrative section, but then they don't make it into the budget. So you're not serious about it. If you're saying we're looking at them, we're exploring it, but as I said before, we don't have a lot of time. The Scottish Funding Council funding gave us 2 years grace period where we don't have to, we're not going to be insolvent, and we need to start this work now because, as Sophia was saying, recruiting new students, opening new markets, having new programs, that will take a couple of years to materialise income. And that is exactly what the funding from the SSC gives us time to do. But the management has prioritised restructuring of the university, which we have doubts on how much money is going to save, over putting all of their eggs in the basket of producing more growth for the university. Because the question I would ask is, next year we have a 2-3% inflation. There's another maybe £6-10 million added to the cost of the university. Where is that money going to come from? If you don't have a growth mindset, we're entering an endless spiral where we're going to lose more staff, where we're going to lose another 100 staff next year, and then another 100 staff the following year. Where does it stop?
Anyone else? Yeah.
Well, my university made £35 million profit on hospitality and conferences. It cost us £80 million in the first place, but we made £35 million of it. But the other biggest saving is that we've got too many trades coming in, and we try to keep that in-house because the trades are actually costing the university a fortune coming in, where it should be mostly put in-house. But the university tax says they can't pay for the overtime or the weekends, but it should be getting done because the students are not there. So it's a vicious circle. But that's the way we've explained to the university, that's where the savings is.
It's the same argument Melissa's making. If you make that investment, you'll probably save it longer term. Sophia?
Yes, so our university management has not systematically asked for input on income generation or savings, more crucially, and there are lots of good ideas among staff to reduce costs, that if there were more trust and more effort to really collect those ideas, there could be a lot of value, and we know some of the university systems are very clunky. We're still suffering from the very poor decision making around this system, people and money that cost so much money and so much goodwill, and did harm to the university's reputation, and it's still using up a disproportionate amount of staff time on simple processes. So just things like that could be addressed. There's a lot that staff could feed in. And I would like to point out to the committee, I don't think this point has really been raised, cuts cost money. Restructuring is expensive. Last year, the university spent £18 million on paying off staff to leave. They're spending a great deal on hiring change managers. They're spending on, costs of management consultancies, £250,000 to one management consultant in part of 2025. So there's a lot of money going into cuts that could actually be used to address some of these issues and with staff in an environment of greater trust.
Just on the SFC, just as a follow-up, it's asked university to develop and execute a plan to deliver a university strategy that demonstrates appropriate and concrete engagement with staff and students. Now, from what I've heard today, that might not necessarily be the case. I'll probably get a fair idea what the answer you're all going to give me when I ask this question. But I was struck by what Sophia said about regular engagement doesn't mean meaningful engagement all the time. And I think that's the important part in all of this as well. But with the idea of income generation and in particular financial stability, surely if you had that type of meaningful engagement, you would have the opportunity to be able to come up with ideas and put things forward and actually be part of the solution and not seen as management as part of a problem. Yeah.
Yeah, thank you. I'll just give a quick background. So obviously income generation has been key to what a number of units and schools have had to do at the University of Aberdeen. So obviously from when the modern languages situation happened in 2023, my excellent colleagues there set out ways that they could increase revenue and all of these things. But they were kind of caught off guard by it. We were told a few weeks before there's going to be no compulsory redundancies. Then everything changed. All of a sudden, letters start flying in, and then change has to be very quick. And I would say, when we're talking about income generation, this is on top of what everyone else is doing anyway. People do work towards income generation anyway, but when you get these sudden shocks, and it's like, well, you have to do this now. And this is exactly what we had in May last year. We had 5 schools that were identified as needing to make savings or increase revenue. So everyone in those schools set about coming up with ideas and plans to do so on top of their current workload, which was extremely challenging. And they came up with numerous ideas, but the university rejected them all. Right? So all that effort, all that work is gone. And it goes back to the point which you mentioned in the second part or the second question, is you need to have that trust. We need to be able to trust that when we're coming up with these ideas, that the university is facilitating and supporting implementation of them, not just saying, no, it's not going to bring enough money quickly enough, because all those plans that people had to come up with and all that effort, the money had to land the next year. So if it had a sort of a 2 or 3 year sort of time for it to return, it wasn't accepted. And I go back to my point earlier, that this needs long-term thinking. That year-on-year idea and an obsession about individual deficits isn't going to help, because these things take time, especially if you want to start new programmes, sort of diversified portfolio of courses. That can't be done quickly. And so the feeling was that everyone was being set up to fail. Like, how could we even achieve this if there was just this miracle fund that we could tap into with a wonderful application? So it's a key issue. And if there was proper engagement, proper discussion, we could all agree on the journey that we want to take as an institution, that would help these things. But at the moment, what comes from the top is that we need to resize, we need to rationalise, and there's a lot of marketised terminology that comes from the senior management team at Aberdeen. We're complex business, various phrases like this, which I dislike, because we're not a business, and never have been, and never will be. Yeah.
Malwart's changed. They invite the unions in on Wednesday, tell us that 6 people's going on the Monday, but it's private and confidential, and then they go and tell us 6 people on the Monday we've consulted with the unions. That's the way that they act, because we've already told us what's happening. That's consulting with the unions. We've now changed the society a bit in the university, because we took a grievance against them because of the way they were treating people in the work. But people were getting a wee tap on the shoulder, or asked to go in for an interview on a Friday and asked to leave their laptop and their badge on the desk and not even get a chance to say goodbye to anybody on the Monday. That's how bad it got in the university. Right, so we've had to change the culture on that. But that's what the university, if they've already made their mind up that person's going, that person's going. They don't have they didn't even give them the VR or a voluntary system to say, like, there's 5 people in this department, choose amongst yourself who wants to take it. They chose the individual person. And most of the individual people were either had long-term sickness or a disability. We've found it out. So we're looking into that just now, so we can take a case against the university.
Sophia?
Yeah, I'd like to just note that one of the things that's really been missing at Edinburgh, and this may be the case at other institutions, is any proper modelling of what the impact of these cuts will be on income. So we've been saying, the unions have been saying all along, actually, you're likely with this level of cuts to depress the income of the university. How are you modelling that? I think Douglas Ross asked last time, has there been any modelling of these matters at Edinburgh? No, is the answer. Has there been any modelling of the impact on the city of a large reduction in Edinburgh's staff base? No. So I do these cuts proposals kind of come out of nowhere. There seem to be a fashion among VCs. They're ill thought through. They cost money, and they often don't need to be happening at all.
Just, I'll probably sound as if I'm going off at a tangent, but it's another question that I had, but Stuart kind of brought it up in his bit there. We've heard that union submissions have obviously said that, to the committee, have stated that some staff have found out about job losses via the media itself. You know, how can we avoid this in the future and get to a stage where we can actually, you know, not have people tapped to the shoulder, as Stuart has said, and actually deal with it in a proper manner here? Stuart.
We're asking the university, when you took our pension offers, is this the last stage, or are you going any further? Have you got a wider plan? Let us know now, and we can help you on this journey. And you just put blinkers on. We gave you, 3 unions gave the opportunity to universities to say, let's work together. Tell us what's going to happen. Who do you think are targeting, and how can we get around this, and we can put a case forward? No, the university is in a turn on itself, and they decided that down 6 months down the road, that's the way they want to go until they're reined back in again. It's only until they're reined back in or questioned why you're doing this, or we threaten them with strikes or threaten them with the law. That's when the university sits up and takes notice again. But they're a wee totally on their own, and if they think they can get away with it, they'll get away with it. And that's the difference with universities. Thanks, Joe.
Well, this is a complaint that has been directed at us, I know, so I could imagine where it might come from. I guess the problem here is that lack of proper parameters for meaningful consultation, and often a decision has been made, say, to close a particular unit. At Edinburgh in the autumn, had this consultation around job losses at the Institute for Academic Development. It was quite a small number of jobs, and I'm glad to say that most people were internally redeployed and or decided to leave. But yeah, how voluntary those were, I don't know. But in that case, management had already taken the decision to close this unit that many university staff think is very valuable, provides service for for development for staff and students across the institution. Before the consultation even started, consultation periods are too short. 45 days, I believe, is like a statutory minimum, and we think it should be longer, more like 90 days, and they should be saying, you know, long before you're saying you're issuing possible at-risk letters or entering a formal consultation. Well, we're considering closing this. Would you like to suggest alternatives? What do you think? That didn't happen. So in that context, you sometimes have these things happening, but it is about excessive levels of confidentiality, lack of parameters for meaningful consultation, I would say.
Anyone else? No, I'm happy.
Very much. Willie Rennie.
I'm really worried about universities in Scotland. I mean, I think the situation is, for some, almost a near extinction status with some of them. We saw that at Dundee. I had staff who live in my constituency over the water in Fife who were very upset, visibly upset on their doorsteps. And they saw a cloud that was not removing, it was not disappearing above their head for months and months on end. So I think this is real. And the Scottish Funding Council's report from September last year was really stark. And it highlighted increasing staff costs, despite what we've heard today, increasing staff costs, further flat cash settlements or unanticipated public spending cuts, an uncertain macroeconomic outlook, including rising inflation and persistent high interest rates, continuing high energy costs, infrastructure pressures, including RAC, impact of the delivery of high-quality learning and teaching and research, the requirement to invest in the achievement of public sector net zero targets, the impact of UK government policies on immigration and international students. Each one of them are significant on their own. And all the measures that I've heard this morning aren't the big answers. And I'm hoping this review that we've got with the partnership between universities, the government, the union, students, is going to come up with big solutions, because everything we've talked about today will not plug that gap. So where are the big answers? Has anybody got them this morning? Because I'm really worried that if we carry on just micromanaging a really catastrophic situation, potentially catastrophic situation, which the government minister, the previous government minister, Graham Day, acknowledged that the funding system was broken, which is big for any government minister to acknowledge the system is broken. So I'm really worried if we just carry on as we are, some of these institutions might disappear. So, has anybody got any big answers this morning? Yes.
I might not have a big answer, but I've got opinions. I can share those. I think I'm worried about universities in Scotland, but I'm also worried about universities in the UK. So if you look just a little bit wider, there was an article recently on the Times for Higher Education predicting that 45% of all universities in England as well would have a deficit this year. So this is a wider question to be answered. What is the value of higher education, and how much are we ready to invest in it to ensure that the future students in Scotland will have access to a suite of courses, not just skills, not just being ready for the market, right? That they would have access to the arts and, to the humanities, that they will be able to become scientists if they want to. I'm a scientist myself, so I definitely encourage that kind of path, a career that would become doctors, nurses, and so on. What is the value of higher education? And if universities are struggling so far, yes, maybe looking at the funding model is important, but also answering the question on how much is this government, but also the UK government, is ready to put into the sector. If we were looking, so another article, I think it was this month in Times in Higher Education, is predicted that the sector has already lost more than 10,000 jobs across the entire country, and is going to lose 10,000 jobs every year from now on. Are we prepared to allow this? You can tell by my name, I'm not from the UK, and I came to the United Kingdom because of the relevance and the prestige of the higher education in the United Kingdom and in Scotland, of course. This is our badge to the world. So, if it was in any other sector, the governments would be stepping in and putting a plug in this crisis, because yes, it's not sustainable.
Before I come to Stuart, so Miles, Paul and myself were at the EIS hustings for schools last Thursday evening. They wanted £1 billion. So you're asking for more public money today. When I go to the housing conference next week, who'll deal with the housing emergency, they'll probably want a similar sum. But the economy isn't exactly booming just now. So where does the money come from? I understand. I don't disagree with anything you've said about the value of universities, and it's a flag to the world. But we've got lots of different, difficult, really terrible choices to make.
And I wouldn't want to overstep and get into a political argument about what the priorities of the country should be, but I would, being from higher education, I would make a case that higher education should be pretty high up at the top of the priorities just now.
OK. Let me bring in Stuart, then Sophia.
Well, the British government's just announced that they want universities to open places across abroad. they want to encourage universities to open campuses abroad in other countries. Why not invest the money here in Britain where it should be going? Right. That's where it should be. Why should we've opened a place in Dubai and there's all these places. Why should we be doing that? All right, we might get money in the end, but the point is we're spending money out of our own universities to try and get something abroad. So then you stop the students coming here because you've now opened a campus abroad. So it's a vicious circus.
Sophia.
This is obviously a complex issue, and I think requires a rethink of what public finance does, where it comes from, finance in general. Actually, there are lots of people thinking about that. And I suppose I'd like to make the point of, higher education is a common good and should be preserved as such into the future for the people of Scotland, and that the research and the forms of education are an investment in the future. But they're also a key element of local communities. Somebody else talked about cold spots.
Sophia,
we need to think about how those institutions have a multiplier effect on local economies.
I could go to every other conference and they would say exactly the same thing. They would say the same on housing, they would say on school education, on nursery education. Every sector would say that, and everyone would be correct. But if the institutions don't exist tomorrow, they won't be able to do any of that work. So what are the more immediate, tangible improvements, the solutions that we need to find? Because I haven't heard any this morning. And we need to... Stuart, you come.
So you have to invest in education to start off with, because education is the backbone of Britain. Most students put more money into the economy than anybody else as a student when they graduate or when they're going through the economy. So if you don't invest in students, then you're not investing in an economy. And another thing, I think you should bring everybody back to work. I'm not being rude, but I'm just saying I think everybody should go back to university and work, and that would bring the economy back into the place as well with money. Then people spend money in shops, buses and transfer. So something has to be changed. We've sat back and not even looked at education for a long, long time, and it's coming back to bite us. Everybody's took the eye off the ball of the universities because they think they were an authority on their own, self-governing, self-money. But it's now been proved, no foreign students, no money, no nothing, and everybody's in a crisis now. And you have to stop the crisis now by investing. If you don't invest now, you'll have a bigger crisis in your hands.
Okay. Well, just to say, we've witnessed at Edinburgh an enormous amount of wasteful spending. Just reining that in through better governance procedures would mean that we can do more with the resources we have. Is
that really the big solution, though?
I'm just talking at Edinburgh. I'm not an economist, but I think there are other models of economy that can be explored as way. I mean, some people are talking about education bonds, for example. I mean, I don't know if that's a system that could work in Scotland, but there are alternatives being proposed by some people who work on higher education finance.
So I don't want to dominate this, so I'm going to go to Dan, if that's okay.
Yeah, I mean, I completely accept the complexity of the issue, and I would love to be able to sit here and give you a direct answer to resolve it, but I think that's why we're here, that it is such a complex issue and it needs unpicking. But what I think the key point to understand is that everyone at the institution, staff, are working as hard as they can to generate revenue, keep delivering the services that the students want and the students need, right? So everyone is working over and above that, but we need to all work together in a number of ways. I mean, you've noticed today that there's a lot of conflict between senior management teams and what the trade union experience of those engagements are. That's not healthy. That's not going to help us moving forward. And
even if you had the best relationships in the world, would it really plug this financial gap? Let's say they were outstanding and there was a real partnership across the board. Would that in itself solve this problem?
No, but it would help to relieve it. We can't. It's not going to be resolved that way. Unfortunately, I can't see it. Okay. Yeah.
Chair, I don't want to take up. I know we're running against the clock. If you can keep it brief both of you. Yeah.
I'll be very quick. You're saying that you're not hearing answers here today, but what is the answers that our vice chancellors and principals are offering? Is it job cuts and course closures and less education provision in Scotland? The answer?
Okay.
Well, other European countries do it. There are plenty of other alternative models to look at that the Scottish Government could explore.
Okay. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you. Paul O'Kane.
Thank you very much, Convener. We've had quite a lot of back and forth this morning, and I suppose to try and pull things back to one of the principal issues we've discussed is the situation at the University of Dundee and the Gillies Review and the learning that came out of that, I suppose. So I wonder if I can just ask, what do you feel the key lessons learned are? And have they been taken cognizance of, I suppose? And I'll maybe ask that particular question in terms of Dundee to Melissa first, and then I'm interested about what wider lessons there are for the sector.
Thanks for the question. I think the main takeaway from the Gillies report is that the crisis at Dundee was as much a financial crisis as a governance crisis. And I try to make this very clear in my answers today, that the University of Dundee was very successful at the time when these crises happened. We should have had plenty of cash resources. We should have... the University of Dundee doesn't have much debt because we never really used the revolving facility that we used to have with the... I believe it was the Bank of Scotland. I don't want to be incorrect in that, but we never used that. And effectively, what happened is that the leadership didn't have proper oversight of the financial costs of capital expenditures and potential, deficits that were created by increases in costs of energy, staff costs, and all that. So the big takeaway from the Gillies report is that governance is the key and that we need to address that first. That addressing the financial issue without addressing the governance issue that created it and enabled it will bring us here again in the next few years. It's not going to solve the issue. The frameworks were in place for management to adhere to, and clearly they were not adhered to. So that, I think, is the main takeaway. Has it been fixed from our perspective? No, because as I explained to the committee just now, even on their own action plan that the University Executive Group has made to respond to the Gillies report, which from our perspective was possibly not even that effective in itself, because as colleagues have said, setting up town halls to tell staff what you're going to do is not meaningful engagement. So, meeting with unions and having only verbal updates or not really taking on any of the comments or the suggestions that are made doesn't really address that issue that Gillies had identified in terms of dissenting voices as well. I have to say, I am a senator myself, and in the process of the reappointment of the interim principal, there were two subsequent meetings of Senate. So there was the formal meeting of Senate and then a special meeting of Senate afterwards. And in the special meeting of Senate, where Senate was discussing the reappointment of the principal, the minutes of that specific meeting had individual senators identified with their comments on whether the principal should have been reappointed or not. So clearly there remains issues with, accepting criticism and constructively working with staff and the unions that remain, despite the changes in senior management that we've seen so far. We remain hopeful that with the further changes that are coming down the line, this will be addressed, but at the moment, from our perspective, it hasn't.
Okay, and I wonder if, more generally, is it your view that, because you said there was a mixture of financial, I suppose, and governance issues, and those two things were interlinked. I mean, is it your view that the solutions to that are interlinked? So we've had a lot of discussion this morning about how oversight is appointed or elected. I think there's a sense, though, that there's not a clarity on whether that will actually would fix the problem or not. You know, I think the view would be if you're dealing with £1 billion budgets, there has to be a degree of financial training, perhaps, or expertise. I mean, is it your view? What's your view out of the one thing, or I can't say the one thing because that's not fair, but what is the principal thing on governance that you think would make the difference at your institution?
Yes, I think a more democratic structure will make the difference, but also transparency. So I try to put across the point that a more democratic structure with very clear representation. So now, for example, in the faculty restructures that we're seeing, originally on Senate, there would be representation from each of the schools and multiple senators per school, depending on the numbers of staff in the schools. But now, no, actually, with the new faculties, we have no clarity on whether that representation is going to be shrunk to maybe only 4 senators, or and that transparency also in terms of the meetings, when these meetings are happening, when the Senate is taking a decision, how did we arrive to that decision? When court is making a decision, how did they arrive to that decision? What was the discussion that took place? It's really, really important to address some of these issues, because some of the things that maybe have slipped in the past will not slip if it's a public record.
And I suppose even taking into account the discussion that's happened this morning about whether elected chair worked or made the difference or does generally make the difference, your view would still be that a more democratic structure would fix some of the problems? Yes.
Yeah, absolutely. Yes.
Oh, okay.
Our view is that a more democratic structure will address at least some of the challenges, and also it will make the senior management more accountable to staff and students.
Okay, I mean that's interesting. I wonder if I can just widen it out, just in terms of the learning from the Dundee example. I mean, are there concerns that other institutions could be in? I mean, I think the Cabinet Secretary, I think, when she was here, referred to Dundee almost as being fairly isolated or kind of trying to, I think, isolate it. But actually, is your view that this could happen in other institutions? And what is your key takeaway that has to be learned from the Dundee example in order to...
Chair.
Yeah, I'll start with Chair.
Sorry, apologies. My boss, the new principal, doesn't look at a covering report. It doesn't affect us because we're not Dundee. And that's what he told the unions. That the Covenant report is there, but it's not for them, because we are a university with more finances, more sound, and that doesn't really bother us. That's his opinion on it, because they're their own institution. As I was saying, you need to get this thing away from universities at their own institution and start to listen to what people's got to say. But according to him, that report is okay, but it doesn't apply to us.
Okay, that's interesting. Sophia?
Yeah, I mean, we've talked extensively about transparency, and I've said that the key problem at Edinburgh, or one of the really key problems, has been excessive capital spending, where you now have this huge depreciation charge every year that staff and students will be paying for many years to come. But the Gillies, we haven't seen changes from Gillies, really. Apart from that, which is great, some of our staff representatives on court are a little less scared about having conversations with unions and collecting opinions, and that is important. They shouldn't be scared. They're trustees. They're not reps, but I mean they're elected by trade unions in some cases, or the Senate, or whatever. But much more needs to be done. I think all universities should say, how are they implementing the Gillies standards? And at Edinburgh specifically, we have this sort of opaque structure called the University Initiatives Portfolio Board, and these kind of centralised decision-making structures that are opaque and not accountable are really a problem. And we have still an extreme level of secrecy around the capital projects, with the Estates Committee and Capital Projects Group, which is responsible for making these capital expenditure decisions, has refused to make available any of its papers since 2021. I mean, please, committee, next, if you all get elected, re-elected, or if you're standing, call our principal in next session. Ask him. We've been asking for almost a year and gotten nowhere.
Dan.
Yeah, so in relation to Gillies, I think there's been a couple of things. It does seem to have had the impact that the financial scrutiny at court has increased, which I think is a positive. But what I'll say in terms of how sort of the other side of it works in relation to challenge and various other things and engagement. I mean, I said earlier, we're not getting any engagement that we would expect in relation to our current dispute and the change programme that's coming. And I'll go back slightly. So in December 2024, we had a Gordon report which looked at the situation around modern languages at the University of Aberdeen. And the things that, I mean, I don't know how much I can say, so I'll be brief, but the general consensus of that was that there wasn't enough listening, there wasn't enough engagement, plans were enacted, and it created a significant problem and reputational damage because it wasn't handled correctly. So that's another example of issues that happen when things are decided and no one's being engaged within the decisions.
Okay. Thanks, Commissioner.
I appreciate, I know I've had quite a lot of time, but just to pick up on some of the points about the Gillies review, I think we've talked about organisational culture, we've talked about the issues of governance and financial management, and obviously if your organisational culture is wrong, you can have all the money you want, you can have the best governance structures, but you won't actually get the outcomes. And Gillies highlighted this very clearly. The governance frameworks were fit for purpose, but institutions failed to operate them effectively. So I suppose my last question for all of you is that question on culture and value. You know, what are universities for? How do we make sure that the value of education is seen as the core principle driving everybody, you know, from the very top of the university right through the staff structures and students? How is it that we make sure that value of education is what matters? And because without that key point from Gillies, I think, you know, we're basically just talking round and round the houses about the issues here. And a couple of you have said we'll be back here in 3 or 4 years' time. I don't know, Melissa, if you want to go first, I mean.
Yeah, so I'm trying to. Sorry, I got lost for a second. I would like to give so many answers. Yeah, so in terms of the Gillies and the culture, yes, I think we need to think about culture very closely. And culture is not something that it will be changed in 6 months or 8 months. But culture is also something that is changed through example, through leading by example and through leadership. Now, what we have submitted to the committee as part of our joint statement with the 3 campus unions has been that what really seems to have been lost in this financial crisis and this attempt to address this deficit that, you know, seemed to eat everything into it is the valuing people side of things. So while staff are very keen to work with the university to support its recovery, there doesn't seem to be a reciprocity in that. And it was very telling at some point. We had a meeting with the principal and we came out of that meeting feeling that we were not in the same business. As unions, we were trying to do as much as possible to save jobs and to ensure that our staff well-being was safeguarded. And on the other side, there seemed to be very much a focus on cutting the deficit, regardless of what happens to staff, regardless of what happens to their health and well-being. because if you acknowledge through the listening exercise that you have a traumatized workforce, why would you not put forward a strategy or an action plan to address the institutional stressors that cause that mental health crisis? So far, all the university has done is circulated a series of emails saying, well, you can speak to a counsellor, and we've paid some extra for some external counselling service because our internal services can't cope with the request. I mean, I don't think that that is appropriate, and I would challenge that that actually fulfills the duty of care that an employer has on its employees. In the meantime, they're still refusing to rule out compulsory redundancy. So staff at the university, since November 2024, this is really important, has been told, your job might be at risk. We don't know when. We're making plans. Don't worry about it. At some point, we'll let you know, or maybe some local newspaper will publish it. But it's been really, really hard. And I think we've completely lost track of the fact that valuing people is one of the foundational values of our institution. And so how do you change culture? Well, the management could come forward and in the first instance tell staff that because the university has now received or is now about to receive funding from the Scottish Funding Council, well, the threat of compulsory redundancy is removed and relieved some of the stress from staff. It needs to be led by example, so the chair of court, the principal, interacting with staff in a constructive way, showing very clearly, as the university has put in their action plan for engagement with staff, that they will publish the outcome of how staff and students' feedback has influenced the decisions, not just collecting feedback and then sitting on it and saying, well, we'll publish at some point.
Okay, thanks. Sophia.
Listening, our management, university management, has repeatedly failed over many years to listen to staff and unions, and we see this again and again, and the consequences are quite dire. Read the People and Money report to the Edinburgh University Court, and it's very, couched in a certain language, but the implications are quite clear. I think I'd also like to see a bit of taking of responsibility. Why? Edinburgh should not be in the situation it is in. Some kind of humility, some account to staff. And as Melissa says, valuing people. Our principal talks about, this is for the future of the university and sustaining its mission into the future. I mean, what university? It's not an abstract thing. A university is a complex ecosystem of staff and students with its own particular strengths that needs to be preserved over time. And you've been given the stewardship of that charitable enterprise, which is, well beyond the value of it is well beyond that staff and student body. And what have you done with it? I would like that question answered. And stop talking about it as a business. I mean, again and again we hear the business this, the business that. Every time I say, this is a university, it's a charity, please talk in a different way. But this culture is pervasive through, and so a lot of the models are coming in from business that is seen as efficient, and they're not fit for purpose, and we see that now.
Okay, thanks. Stuart?
Well, university is the backbone of society. It's like an independent city on its own. You close down a university down, or let a university close down, then all the shops, pubs, clubs and everything else round about that will collapse. So you have a duty of care to make sure that that university is open, but you've also got a duty of care to make sure that the university answers to you, not on autonomy on itself, because that's what it is. It's an autonomy on itself, and they don't have to answer to nobody because that's what they do. Thanks.
Thanks, Stuart. And Dan?
Yeah, I'll just be brief. My colleagues have said a lot and very effective.
Thank you. That's it.
There we go. Yeah. So do I have to repeat myself?
No, you're fine.
Okay, perfect. All right, get my train of thought back. Okay, yeah, so fundamentally, what my fear is in relation to the situation at Aberdeen is, and we saw it in the modern languages situation, is that, and some of those people have been at risk for an extremely long time, which is what Melissa has been identifying about at Dundee as well. That takes its toll. And my worry is that the way that the sort of marketisation of the sector is operating is that we're going to lose subjects and we're going to lose disciplines, and we'll be poorer for it. That's going to be that's a fact. And I mean, I think there was a brief discussion about the UK sector more broadly, but when people lose their jobs in the current climate, where are they going to go? That's an important problem as well. Yes, we've talked about the extent to which job losses at universities will impact the universities themselves and the individuals, but there's a broader impact on the economy and all of those things. So we have to be really, really careful about how we move forward in this situation. And I mean, and from what was said earlier, I do think senior management teams have to take some responsibility in that. We are where we are, I get that, but there were times that were better that I don't think it was always money was spent in the best way. But that's going back to long-term thinking, and that's what we need more of.
Thank you.
Okay, thank you very much for your time and your answers today, and also your engagement with the committee prior today over previous months and years, and I'm sure it will continue with our successor committee in the next session. So again, thank you to you and your members as well, and I will briefly suspend the meeting to allow the committee to move into private session to consider its final agenda items.